Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. Hope you're doing well. Ask Next, Errant Vice, Ulcerated, Elden Enthusiast. Nice to have all of you again. What went wrong? A certain Karian princess and her lofty ambitions? Yeah. So, yesterday on stream we went ahead and watched Crunchy's fantastic video about the structure of reality in Elden Ring. And today we are going to be looking at something a little bit different for this channel. A video by JoshStrifeHayes, which is What Went Wrong with Gaming. I'm a big fan of his channel. He produces a lot of really well thought out video essays. He examines a lot of MMOs and tries to find like where many of these games kind of fail in their genre. So I don't think I've seen this video by him, so I figured why not do something a little bit different, but still kind of on the topic of gaming and stuff in general. And then after this video, I'm going to look at a couple videos by a human Justicar. I know Crunchy has recommended this channel before. I haven't watched anything by them yet, so maybe it's a mistake to watch 3 at once, but who knows? I assume they're going to be good since they've been recommended to me by multiple people. So after JoshStrifeHayes, we'll have Where Are the Missing Carian Princesses, which I think is a very interesting topic. Then Radagon of the Golden Order's Complete Timeline. I feel like this is going to be a contentious one. And then Radagon's Secret Sorcery. So, hope you're all ready and strapped in, doing well. Hey Mercy, welcome back in. You haven't... Oh, you love her channel? Okay. Ever watch Viva La Dirt's League's Souls Logic? No, I can't say I have. Hey Spaghetti, welcome back into the stream. Alright. So, let's go ahead and dive on into our first video with What Went Wrong with Gaming with JoshStrifeHayes.
Love video games. They've been my main hobby for most of my life, and now I make videos about video games, which is great. But recently I've been analysing new games and critiquing new systems, and I've noticed a slow but insidious trend toward games becoming more and more monetized, but not fairly monetized. Anti-player monetized. It's the feeling you get when you look at a battle pass in a game you've already paid full price for. It's the tiny...
Oh man, Star Wars Battlefront 2, that's just like some low-hanging fruit. But yeah, I definitely see where he's coming from with this, and it's something that I've thought about a lot as well. I don't have like super concrete thoughts about the topic other than just like, in general, I think live service games kind of suck, with a few exceptions of like some MMOs, but even then, I feel like a lot of them are made grindier to increase player retention rather than trying to make things that are fun or fulfilling for players to do. So it's a little bit of an example of like the dog chasing its own tail, I think.
Slither of sadness when a game you want has different exclusive levels for different consoles, and you'll know you'll never get to experience every part of that game now. It's that cosmetic you want, costing 1,005 gems, but the gems are sold in packs of 1,004.
Yeah, that's the real kick in the teeth, isn't it? When you can tell like how predatory things are when the math just doesn't completely math up properly.
The knowledge that year on year the microtransactions from FIFA Ultimate Team alone make more money than Elden Ring's entire sale run. It's the unfortunate reality of gaming after the marketing executives took over, and it's hard to explain exactly how or when it changed, but explaining things is what I do. So let's go back to the start of gaming and work out when this whole mess started, and then I'll...
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a little bit difficult to come up with a specific point, especially because like at the very dawn of gaming, we had the arcade coin-operated machines, which were literally monetized to the gills in trying to get more and more people to fork over their quarters into these machines. Ironically, like one of my favorite arcade-style games, which was just absolutely terribly broken in terms of difficulty, was like the Simpsons arcade game. One of them. I don't remember which one is which because there's like 4. But anyway, after that style of gaming, when we started to get more consoles, there was still always a ton of shovelware, which I think a lot of people really forget about, especially in the heyday of the NES era. Obviously, like the Atari games were so simplistic and the catalog was so small, it's a lot easier for people to remember the duds like the E.T. game. But in general, I'm curious to see where JoshStrifeHayes is going to like be able to like make a line in the sand, I guess. Like America, we can blame everything on capitalism. I think your auto subs got wrong and you put America instead of America.
Actually pinpoint the exact thing, the specific design choice which makes new games feel wrong. Welcome, I'm JoshStrifeHayes. Let's work out what the hell went wrong with the monetization of gaming. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon, Twitch, and YouTube who keep the channel alive. More information on how you can support at the end. For now, let's begin. Let's go back to the 1980s and early 1990s. The video game revolution was kicking off, but home consoles weren't yet mainstream, so we went to arcade.
Yeah, the Turtles arcade game is also really freaking cool. I remember just like playing with a friend, and I think I'm trying to remember, like, their basement just had like a bunch of coin-op games that their dad had like bought or whatnot, and so like all the slot parts were open, so you could just like keep inserting the 1/4 over and over. And so I just really remember waiting for Bebop and Rocksteady to come out of the elevator. It's not really an elevator, but like this drill like shot up through the floor, and then Bebop and Rocksteady were coming out, so we just like flanked it and started like beating the crap out of them. I mean, we got our ass kicked a lot in that game because it was one of the OG arcade style games, but lot of good memories for young last Protag. And Errant Vice said, people still play the Dark Souls trilogy, but you can't recall another game from 2010, 2014, or 2016 that still receives YouTube content in 2023, though there are like challenge runs for New Vegas and such. I feel like that is probably a little bit of us all being on our own kind of respective echo chambers to an extent, where you're going to get content that appeals to you. So if obviously people in this stream are very interested in the Souls trilogy from Soft Games, so I do think we're going to be more likely to be inundated with content about that stuff. But like you said, like Fallout, Oblivion, Skyrim, I see still going extremely strong. A lot of the Grand Theft Auto stuff kind of comes up, but you are kind of right that there is a lot more of a dedicated fan base for the FromSoft games. And I think part of that is just due to the myopic nature of those games. And so there's still a lot to explore. And even, a decade after the fact, we still haven't found everything.
You put your money in and play the game, effectively making arcades the socially accepted pay-to-play model. There's no denying arcades were bloody expensive. I remember dropping way more than I should have done to complete Time Crisis, but while this was expensive, there was a very simple relationship between the game, the money, and the player. Pay money, get access to the whole game. Victory depends on your skill. Game designers knew it was a simple transaction, and they knew someone would simply play as long as they were able to, so they had to make the game hard so you would die more, and so pay more. This is why the Turtles game had that underwater bit. It's why House of the Dead bosses were damage sponges. It's why Ghosts and Goblins was everything that Ghosts and Goblins is in the early.
Yeah, and it was a weird transition for a lot of the earlier NES style games to eventually transition away from having ridiculously hard content to keep players feeding quarters into the games, because the devs didn't really realize that they didn't keep pumping quarters into consoles, but of course a lot of these games kind of were ported over. Like Miss Pac-Man was a hack version of the original Pac-Man, and then that eventually got ported over to console. I guess Pac-Man's kind of a bad example, but anyway, I don't think it was really until the end of the NES era and the rise of the SNES era where we really moved a lot farther away from like the predatory monetization of games. And of course, not all of these arcade games were like predatory either. Some of the most simple and best arcade games that still like stand the test of the time to this day are games like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Asteroids, Donkey Kong, etc. So games that had like a good balance of skill versus difficulty. And obviously some people have gone on to like completely master Pac-Man and Space Invaders or like Tetris. So yeah, it was just kind of a very interesting dawn of the medium, I suppose. TMNT can die in a fire. You hated that level. I don't remember if the arcade version had the dam, but man, that dam. Goddamn. Yeah, we have come full circle a little bit. And hey, Mortis, welcome back to the stream. Nice to have you again.
days of home consoles when people would rent games. We even called difficult levels blockbuster levels, designed to make the rental period longer and so you'd have to keep renewing it. So why don't these money-hungry games make us feel the same way as modern money-hungry games?
Actually, that just reminded me, and I'll try to stop pausing so damn often. I should probably walk back my statement about like the Super Nintendo games, because I have heard rumors that like the Disney games, specifically like the Lion King and Aladdin, were intentionally made more difficult so that way kids would continue to rent the games more. That does kind of sound like more of a conspiracy theory to me than anything, because I don't know if those studios received kickbacks from like Blockbuster or anything like that, but man, those games are just kind of unnecessarily difficult.
Well, it's because the trade of money for game was simple, and there was nothing insidious about the transaction itself. You knew what you were giving, and you knew what you were getting. And if you were to break down the design time of a game into a pie chart at that point, it might look something like this. Story, graphics, narrative connections between them, mechanics, marketing, playtesting, and then how much a go at the arcade costs. There was a lot going on in the development of a game at these times, but it's all focused on making a game good, because at that time, good games make the most money. When a company discovered a...
And do you guys remember that time in gaming history when good games made the most money? I sure do. Pepperidge Farm remembers. Hey, Beans and Rice, welcome back in. Errant Vice thinks another thing with the microtransaction riddle titles is that they're not games like Dark Souls. They're like sports games or yearly released FPSs. People have been playing Skate 3 for like 13 years. Yeah. I mean, for me now, I think a large part of what kind of resonates with what JoshStrifeHayes is saying here is that you kind of knew what you were getting. Like, when you put in a quarter, you're given one life. Whether you screwed up or the game just crapped on you, I mean, you kind of had that expectation going into it. Whereas, like, now, you buy Call of Duty, the base game, and you think, you know, it's a base Call of Duty game. I don't know if people think about that anymore, but anyway, some months down the line, they start adding in random celebrities into the game, like frickin' Snoop Dogg I saw is in Call of Duty. What on earth is going on? And there's also this weird component of the fear of missing out, which is also heavily enforced in a lot of like more modern games. Like, you need to play within this time period or you're going to miss out on getting like this cool skin or like seasonal events, which I do like some seasonal events and like seasonal cosmetics and stuff in games, but it can just become a little bit overwhelming. And I think the issue for me is like, I really like Halloween stuff, but if I spend all like my, game allowance that I will give to myself for like a specific game for a year, if I blow that all on Halloween and then all of a sudden December rolls around and they have like amazing winter stuff that I want to buy, it's like, well, shoot, I didn't know this was going to come out this way. Like, there's just kind of always something hidden around the next corner that's waiting to stick its hand in your pocket and take out your wallet, you know? Please never abbreviate cyberpunk. Yeah. It's because Snoop is one of the owners of FaZe. Oh, I didn't even know that. Call us Snoopy.
A successful game, they couldn't just augment the original with downloadable content or extra levels because that technology didn't exist yet. They'd have to make a complete sequel, and so gamers got more games. Jump forward to the mid-1990s, the home console market had taken off. You buy a console, you buy a game, and then you play that game. Now, the whole lives mechanic in games at this time was a holdover from the arcade design space and wasn't actually needed in home consoles, because you didn't need the player to put more money in. Dying when you have 3 lives, then restarting from your last save, or just dying and restarting from the save anyway with no arbitrary life limit was functionally the same thing, but design moves slowly. Away from the arcade model, you no longer paid per play, and you now paid per game, and you then played as much as you wanted. Games were...
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of... I don't know if anybody else has seen this silly-ass... Is it actually technically still an 80s movie? It might have been like released in 1990. This movie called The Wizard with, I think, Ben Savage as like the little kid who's this video game wizard. And long story short, they try to get to like Las Vegas or something like that to get to like a video game convention where they can play this brand new game. And it turns out that this game is going to be the new Mario game, Mario Brothers 3. Like, this is literally, I think, how most kids in America found out about Mario Brothers 3. Like, anyway, the finale of it has them trying to get as far as they can, but with the caveat of they needed to get like the highest score at the end. And it's just kind of really funny whenever I go back and remember that technically in the Mario games, you still have like a high score counter. Because like every time you like stomp a Koopa, you get 100 points, pick up a coin, it's 100 points, all that kind of stuff. And then of course like the multipliers for bouncing on multiple things and whatnot. Hey Spicy, welcome to this stream. Spicy would argue that there aren't more bad games nor less good games. It's just that the bad and mediocre games also have huge marketing, if not more marketing than good games. Yeah, and I think that is true to an extent as well. And you might have missed it earlier in the stream where I said, like, there's always been shovelware. So I do think that people look back with a little bit of cognitive bias, because when they look at the NES games, they think of like their favorites, which are still like really good. Whereas it's really, really easy to overlook all the bad ones that you only played for like 20 minutes and you're like, yeah, I'm good, and never again. You love The Wizard? Nice. No, not Pinball Wizard, but similar movie, but also completely different. In the early 2000s, they released a new Tony Hawk game every year, and those were some pretty good years. Nothing wrong with the Tony Hawk games. Chrono Trigger is the only SNES game. What do I mean? Indeed. NES had some of the best and worst games ever. Indeed, it was the best of times and the worst of times.
Expensive, of course, but when you bought a game, it was complete. If it shipped with bugs, it would just have bugs forever. If it shipped with secret unlockable stuff, it would have that forever. When you owned the game, you owned the ability to play as much as you want of the complete experience. And this was a very simple and fair transaction. While the arcade was, here's a game, pay us to have a go, the console was, here's a game, pay us to keep it and play it whenever. But the home gaming scene wasn't just consoles, it was also PCs. Now, back then PC gaming wasn't as mainstream as it is today, but it did come with one major advantage. Because the PC held a load of data files on its hard drive instead of just reading them from the disk or cart like a console, developers could create additional content for a game and sell that. Like the incredible RPG Baldur's Gate, releasing in 1998, and then the multi-hour-long expansion Tales of the Sword Coast in 1999. This was a time in gaming where developers could develop additional content, but when they did, it was usually a lot of content. PC games saw expansion after expansion, Morrowind seeing the Tribunal and Blood Moon expansions, Diablo 2, then the Lord of Destruction expansion, and all the extra modules for Neverwinter Nights. This was additional content for a game without being a sequel, but again, gamers didn't hate this because the transaction was very simple to understand and it felt fair. You gave them money, you got an experience designed to be the most fun it could possibly be. The biggest difference in this era is there's no trickery. You're not being manipulated, it's just a straight up understandable product. If we again take the idea of breaking down game development time into a pie chart, you've probably got a few new bits to the pie by now. Magazine adverts and articles, some TV ads, and the arcade price replaced with a box price. But it is still mostly make a good game and you will make good money. Then into
Yeah, and obviously I'm going to get on my boomer soapbox here and just kind of go down old memory lane and gush about being a kid and seeing like the new issues of Game Informer magazine or like Nintendo Power. Even now, every once in a blue moon, I'll just go back and look at some old reviews if I can like find them for some of my favorite games online. And it was just a kind of a different feeling. And one thing that I do miss about the magazines and like kind of gaming journalism in general back then is how, at least with Game Informer, I felt like I had a kind of understanding with a few reviewers over like, you know, their preferred game choices. So like if I saw a review by, who can we even say, like Rainier the Ranging Gamer, like I figure like he's more of like the action RPG kind of player, or maybe not RPG, but just like more action kind of gamer. So he has less of a tolerance for like RPGs and stuff. So when he gave an RPG a good score, you're like, oh man, this must be, you know, a quality game. So Now, unless you're like looking at almost individual YouTube channels, it's a lot harder to understand what the hell a critic score even means nowadays. And I think obviously getting right off the cusp of the release of like Starfield especially, it does feel like there's a hell of a lot more astroturfing, and it's a lot harder in general to gauge how good a game is. And part of that is just due to how oversaturated the market is in terms of like getting feedback from literally everybody on the internet, random brigading over things that might not be necessarily applicable to you, whether or not like you don't care about like optimization on PC or like some political thing that might be going on relating to a game and it's review bombs. So it's kind of weird how far we've come, yet also how much we've fallen in the same step there. Morrowind was far from an understandable product. I mean, I don't necessarily know about that, because you should also remember that Morrowind came from a lineage of games that were also very opaque and encouraged players to interact with the world a lot more than they do now. You know, before the whole Ubisoft UI user experience memes that we have going on now. Is Baldur's Gate one of the only series to still not have microtransactions? I mean, obviously we have Elden Ring and a lot of the FromSoft games. But to be fair, like there's a ton of indie developers who release games that don't have like microtransactions. And I guess like depending on how you feel like a game like Vampire Survivors, I would say even though it has DLC, I wouldn't consider it a microtransaction because it's more or less kind of like expansions. But that's just also a very small game. The Starfield quality situation feels so forced, it makes you mad. Yeah, I mean, some people are going to enjoy Starfield for its gameplay. Others are going to hate it for its gameplay. Others are going to hate it for like optimization issues. But that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, it's a lot harder to get a general pulse on the situation with gaming now. Imagine having to climb towers in Elden Ring to unlock the map. I mean, you kind of do. You have to ride Torrent to where like the little pedestals are, and that unlocks the next section of the map. Yeah, exactly. Vampire's base price for the game is a microtransaction, indeed.
2004, online gaming really started to kick off, with World of Warcraft being released, but Blizzard aren't the bad guys in this story, at least not yet. For now, we need to look to the east, to another popular online game from Korea called MapleStory. Now, in Japan, the small toy capsules gachapon had been popular for years. You put money into a gachapon machine and get a random toy of varying rarity. These systems appeal to people who like collecting things and people who like random chance or mystery. It's basically gambling on a rather inconsequential level, but the psychology behind it is very, very powerful. So MapleStory introduced an in-game gachapon style system. 100 yen got you a ticket for a random in-game item, and many people consider this to be the first example of a random loot box. But more importantly, this was the first moment in mainstream video games where you could pay money and not know what you were getting. You were no longer...
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to consider. Obviously, I think you had essentially the same principle as loot boxes in other games, but the main difference perhaps with MapleStory is that it was monetized. It was MapleStory's fault.
Paying for the game or for an established product, you were paying for the mystery, the ephemeral moment of what if between purchase and eventual prize. And this system made a lot of money, because MapleStory was online and other people could see what you won. So it was no longer about having the game and enjoying the game, it was now about a sense of community and prestige when you have something somebody else doesn't. If you make your game multiplayer, competition amongst players becomes a thing, and there are a subset of players who enjoy being seen as the person with the best stuff. And unlike real gachapon machines, which were either a physical distance to travel to or had a queue by them or sometimes just sold out, virtual gachapon tickets were unlimited, entirely within the company's control, and could be bought constantly. MapleStory
See, that's just freaking smart, where you essentially have the content in the game being generated by the players, and that feeling of envy and feeling of missing out does real psychological wonders in getting players to consume a product. So, right. Mortis has a hot take that they don't think classic or vanilla WoW is as good as people say, and that you think every live service and MMO sucks on release. I do kind of agree that a lot of live service games and MMOs are going to generally suck on release, but I think with the original vanilla WoW and not like the classic servers, there's a hell of a lot of context to consider in what made that game so special for so many people, in that when it was released, the internet itself was kind of a big novelty for a lot of people, and a game like World of Warcraft was one of the only ways that people could interact with others that weren't in their immediate vicinity or in their like close-knit communities. So back in the old days, we used the dial-up to talk to the other folks on AOL Instant Messenger. And AIM is a cool thing, and like chat rooms were definitely a thing like back in the IRC days. Not that those have really gone away, but World of Warcraft provided a distraction, but it was essentially just a chat room where a lot of people kind of gathered together, and it gave them enough of a unified purpose to kind of stick with each other. So WoW on release as a game wasn't good for being a game, it was good for being a communal hub for a great number of players. And obviously over time, like, I think a large part of the reason WoW has fallen off the map is because you don't really need WoW to have that kind of community builder anymore, because there's so many other things that it competes with that does the WoW thing better than WoW ever did, you know? As a WoW vanilla player, it was a great game because it was new. There are certain aspects of the vanilla WoW experience which I do like, but I do think it's more of like the social aspect. Yeah, if you're coming at it without the original perspective, I mean, WoW definitely has shown its age. Yeah, and as Astanex said, at that time, your characters were kind of limited to what servers you were on, and your reputation did kind of matter back then to an extent. I mean, people would know like who the shitheads were on their servers and either avoid them or ostracize them, but I mean, it's just a different experience.
They already had the in-game items made, so they were selling the excitement of chance, and they were tapping into the collector and completionist mentality of many hardcore gamers. So game developers began to see they didn't actually need to sell a gaming experience anymore. They could instead sell the small adrenaline spike of potential. This was a turning point, a moment investors realised it was completely worthwhile to dedicate at least some game development time, not to the game itself, but to systems within the game designed simply to extract money from the player after they had started playing, but without giving them a complete new game. This is the...
Yeah, I could see where Josh is going with this, that game development changed when game development was no longer the primary focus and when systems design became a larger focus of the game. Yeah, I think I can agree with that. Hey Sinclair, nice to see you. Your WoW is Destiny, yeah.
The first part of the puzzle for where we are today. So let's put this idea of sell random chance into a little box. A box of all the design tricks which don't favour the player or make the game necessarily any better. A box of design tricks which don't make you think, oh my god, this... But instead, use you think, oh my god, this is amazing, I need to tell all my friends, but instead...
I was trying to type in chat and then I hit space and then I like simultaneously muted my mic and muted the video, I guess, somehow. So that was really awkward. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I was just going to try to type in chat that you guys are saying like your WoW is your WoW. So my original WoW was what was called like a multi-user dungeon or dimension, a MUD. So pretty much like a text-based version of WoW.
Instead, use the game as a simple vehicle for additional monetization. Now, the techniques in this box are not games themselves. They cannot exist on their own. They aren't symbiotic with a game because they don't enhance each other. They are parasitic because they need the game to survive but don't necessarily improve it. We'll call this box Abusive Monetization Strategies, or from a more catchy title, Pandora's Box of Bad Design. The main danger of this box is, if we were to take the pie chart of game development time now, knowing that this box exists and knowing the techniques inside it can make a decent amount of money, the finance people know they need to find space for the techniques within this box somewhere on the pie chart.
So I think calling it Pandora's Box is probably one of the most brilliant comparisons you could possibly make about video gaming. And you guys might think I'm overselling this right now, but I do think the one thing that is most often overlooked in the whole story of Pandora's Box is that the bottom of the box, after all the awful things have been taken out of the box, hope is left in the bottom. So Pandora's Box contains hope. And so if players are going through all this monetized bullshit to get what they want, they still have that sliver of hope which leads them on, which is just chef's kiss for this example here. Hey Boxer Wing, welcome back in. You played Final Fantasy Online when WoW came out? Nice.
Which means something else must lose out. Jump forward 2 years to 2006. The Western gaming market hasn't yet discovered the mass appeal and psychological dominance that loot boxes have, but they have discovered something just as important.
Oh god,
Gamers
that
will pay money
character.
to look different. And it all kicks off with this stupid horse.
Yep.
Now, I've made a complete video on the history of this horse, but the short story is The Elder Scrolls Oblivion was a great game with some great DLC, Knights of the Nine and the Shivering Isles. But you could also pay a few dollars to give your horse armor. Now, it's important to understand this is completely cosmetic. It doesn't actually make your horse any better in combat or defend it, but you can buy it. And people did. In fact, a lot of people bought it, and this highlighted another thing. Making a game takes a long time, but once the main game is made, the development time it would take to make a cosmetic for that game is relatively short, and that cosmetic can be sold for a small amount of money, but it can be sold many, many times. The cost is micro, but the sales volume is high, hence microtransaction. Separate from the idea of a complete expansion, which would expand a game and make the game experience bigger, a micro...
Oh man, not only like the train simulator, but have you guys ever seen how many things pop up for like the Sims DLC? Holy crap. Train simulator might be worse for all I know, but yeah. Microtransactions really just add up over time.
Transaction adds hardly anything beyond the original experience. It's almost inconsequential, but it's not free. So now developers know expansions are a bit risky, but microtransactions are very safe and very small. Even if they don't sell, it's not a great waste of developer time. So the focus shifted away from selling a main game with lots of expansions to selling the main game and then lots and lots and lots and lots of small additional things. The problem with this is now developers had a vested interest in keeping the coolest cosmetics or the most fun little things out of the base game and instead releasing them as additional microtransactions, which is something we'll see happen more and more. And this absolutely does not favour the player, because it leads to an experience where you as a player, even though you have bought the game, when you sit down to play it, you do not feel like you have access to the whole game, because you don't.
Yeah, and not only that, they're financially incentivized to make the game worse, so that way they can offer you a completely manufactured solution to make it better for you later on down the line. And I will pretty much never touch a gacha game or like one of those phone-based games where like you're limited to how much energy you can use a day, just because like it just really rubs me the wrong way, because like they're just making the game inconvenient to play. And if that system wasn't in the game at all, it would just be a lot more fun for me to interact with it. With all that being said, I have played like gacha games in the past, but it's not something that I've like really spent any money on at all. You miss just out and out owning a finished product. I know, right? The cool thing is, with all this age of like digital downloads and stuff, you still don't own what you buy.
don't. It used to be you bought a game and got a game. Now it's you buy a game and you get the main framework which you need to pay more to flesh out. So let's add sell small additions to your game as microtransactions to the box of abusive monetization strategies. And as the box grows, so does the space it would need to take up on the game development pie. Now we head into 2009 to the rise of Facebook and one of the cornerstones of casual gaming monetization progression, Farmville. Farmville was everywhere in the late 2000s, made by Zynga, and these guys were masters because Facebook was everywhere. Everyone was on it, and even non-gamers were gaming, which sounds great. But they were burning through the game too quickly. They were enjoying it and then just moving on, which was not great because Facebook is all about retention. So Farmville did something really counterintuitive to increase player retention. They gave you daily energy so you couldn't progress more than a certain amount every day. Now these games were mostly played by people on phones and laptops, and people got bored pretty quickly. And one of the best ways to prevent boredom is to limit your time with something. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, as they say. So energy systems limiting what actions you could take, or timers connected to growing your crops or building things and you couldn't progress them quicker. By making the player progress only in short but intense bursts and then wait for their next fix of game, you either force them to pay more money to gain more energy or to skip the timers, or you make them return tomorrow. And this is game design focused on the formation of daily habits.
Man, who would have known just making Animal Crossing or Harvest Moon even slower was the key to success? Man, it's painful.
Psychological power of the habit has been studied for years. Motivational speakers talk about them, self-help books push them, and now gaming companies were looking to use them as a way to turn players into users. Because it wasn't just about the game being fun anymore. The focus wasn't on giving the player the best experience you could give them and letting the player enjoy it at their own pace. The focus was about the game being effective at encouraging a specific behavior response from the user. Encouraging the user to return day after day is habit forming. Someone who plays your game habitually is more likely to remain playing even after the game itself has stopped being enjoyable. They're just continuing the habit. Along with this,
and not only that, this really just affects a very, very small amount of the population that is going to even be able to get hooked on a game like this. And so that's kind of where you get the whole idea of whales from, where they cast when they cast a wide enough net, it doesn't really matter if all the minnows go through the net. They just need to get their big fish to sustain profitability. So yeah, them coming out with like Farmville and Mafia Wars and all those other kind of games was just kind of really smart. I think like now the equivalent would be something like Clash of Clans, I guess. I don't really know. Or no. Obviously, what are they called? Like Fate Go, I think. Are those microtransaction to hell and back? Mortis, you probably know better than I do. He's describing your relationship with MTG Arena. Yeah, if anything, even though it's not exactly a video game, I do think that the loot boxes of booster packs were the real like OG booster format if you're going to take like the lottery out of consideration. Those are all about abusing some potential mental illnesses. It's totally scummy behavior. I mean, yeah, I honestly do think that there needs to be legislation around this stuff, but it's a little bit of like playing with fire because bad legislation could just ruin things for everybody. So with that being said, I still think more regulation is better than no regulation because this can really screw up people's lives. And of course, it sounds a little bit melodramatic when we have a picture of frickin' Farmville on the screen. But nonetheless, like, I know a lot of people are like praising Overwatch 2 for moving away from the loot box model. And they make it sound as though like, oh, Blizzard's being like benevolent with what they're doing, even if the new progression system sucks. But I think people are probably overlooking that the EU changed their laws so that way they were taking loot boxes out of gaming, and I don't think they could have actually made an Overwatch 2 that continued to have loot boxes within it. So I think Blizzard's hands were tied, to be honest. So if you guys want another reason to hate on Blizzard, you can take that one and add it to the list. Almost all mobile games are, yeah. You agree about potential regulations because so much could go wrong so easily. Honestly, it is more difficult to like completely screw everything up with like the whole gambling thing, but um I do think there just needs to be more regulation on false currencies in general, because if somebody is going to see that it costs like $5 to get extra seeds for their farm here versus like 499 seed points, like who really knows? It might be helpful, but I think when you add in the fake currencies as well as like the RNG, it's just kind of like a recipe for a disaster. So I don't really mind microtransactions when they're like purely cosmetic or not RNG focused, but as soon as you add any component of RNG, I think it's kind of akin to gambling, to be honest.
Game designers knew you would also have friends on Facebook that may not be playing the game, and they wanted those friends to play the game, which is why they put the mechanics in the game of share this achievement with your friend to get bonuses and get boosts. A huge amount of people began playing Facebook games not because...
And that was one of the smartest things that they could have ever done, because I remember like being in college and getting friends to like send me Farmville requests and shit. I made a Farmville, I think, and I played it for like 20 minutes or so, and I was like, this is kind of dumb, and then I like stopped doing it. But I mean, I still got flooded with requests to visit each other's farms every day, or like pokes and all that other goofy Facebook stuff before all the old people joined the platform. Hey Sinclair Lord, nice to have you in the stream again. How you doing?
They thought they would be the...
We've actually got 2 Sinclairs now, so this is kind of funny.
Bonuses and get boosts. A huge amount of people began playing Facebook games not because they thought they would be the type of game they enjoy, but because they were doing their friend a favour by starting up. They were supporting their farm. They were joining their mafia. And just like MapleStory's gacha being viewed by the players in the game, you could share the progress of your farm. You could show off how far along you were, which spurred competition. So we can add limiting progression per day and encouraging you to invite your friends to start the game to give yourself advantages, or the ability to share your progression with the community, which is why achievements on almost all consoles and PCs are publicly viewable, into the box of abusive monetization strategies. And while habitually playing something isn't generating money in itself, it does keep the audience around longer so they can be exposed to other, more successful strategies. Now, some people will point out that paying to advance more or paying to skip timers is in some ways similar to the old arcade process of dying and then putting more coins in to continue, and it is similar, but there is a crucial difference. With an arcade game, you could, in theory, finish the game entirely on skill.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. But holy crap, Ask Next, you said your older sister spent over 3,000 on Farmville? That is crazy. So, I mean, that just goes to show, like, maybe Candy Crush could be comparable to what JoshStrifeHayes is saying here with, like, asteroids in the old arcade games, but man, that's crazy. And then somebody else said something... Oh, yeah. Spicy said they feel that something that could be helpful as a starter would be to not allow buying fake currencies that are just slightly short to buy what you want, or just slightly too much, so that way you buy more. I feel like that's a little bit of a slippery slope, and when you try to actually literally write regulations and laws about that, it just leaves companies a lot of wiggle room to go around those regulations. So one example I have, which kind of like works with that, is that at least in the US, when an employee works for a company for 40 hours per week, they are entitled to benefits. So what do most companies do? Hire employees for 35 hours, 37 hours with a little bit of overtime, 39 when they're really pushing it, but when they do hit 40, somehow they don't get entitled to benefits anyway. So it just leads to a lot of ambiguity, which I think companies would take advantage of because they're financially incentivized to take advantage of all these loopholes. So I think it's probably a better move to get rid of false currency anyway, because it's not truly legal tender, and it feels like, in a certain sense, having a form of currency that competes with like the US dollar or whatever is kind of akin to like counterfeiting, or whatever like the actual like legal definition of it is. But of course, the language that I'm using here might be a little bit strong, but I think it still gets my point across regardless. And Astenix's sister is not an irresponsible person. She just didn't notice. Oh, because they save your credit card and make it easy to buy stuff. All right, going back to the video.
Timers and energy bars in games such as Farmville cannot ever be finished on skill alone, because you will hit a wall that you will need to either wait for or pay to remove. But this wasn't everything. Nowhere near. Farmville had other strategies. You had timers and you could pay to make them progress faster, but not with money directly. Now you had to convert real money into a proprietary currency. In this case, farm bucks. And this is one of the most prevalent designs we still see used, because it does several psychological things disgustingly well. If you can buy something directly from a game, you can see the cost in a currency that you understand. But if the game displays items in their own proprietary currency, such as gems or coins or platinum or farm bucks or whatever they want to call it, you have to make one mental step converting the currency from what you understand to what you don't understand. So all these things are now one mental step away from having real value, and that is hugely important, because even one step is further than most people are willing to go. So let's add that into the box. Proprietary in-game premium currency to obscure real-world value by a single step. Bonus points if it makes you convert the currency to multiple other in-game currencies, which is almost completely impossible to track in your own mind. So you need to buy the currency, and this is the next trick. The currency is usually sold in packs, and these packs are specifically sized to either be just under what you actually need or very, very close to the next best thing, making you consider the next pack up. For example, if you need 100 gems to buy something in the game and gem packs are sold in packs of 90 or 205, you may as well buy the 205 pack. But then there's a really good...
No, you gotta go with the 500 pack, so that way you could get 5 of the first thing, and you know, you're really just saving your money in the long run when you spend more money to do this.
Item in the game for 210, and you're only 5 gems short. But the next pack contains 500 gems. But there's a mega item for 505 gems, and you're only 5 gems shy of that now. You're not thinking about...
Damn it, I'm 5 gems short, now I gotta go back to the 91, but no, I can't do 90 because the next item that I might need, it might have a round number, so 205, yeah, that could work. Yeah, we'll go to 205. So now, instead of just buying the thing for, 180 coins, we've essentially gotten 705.
About the number 505, you're thinking it's only 5 and then only another 5. Much smaller jumps for much higher jumps in value. You'd be a fool if you didn't take them, right? So that's going in the box of bad design. But let's say you do buy a pack. Whatever pack you buy, you will spend your unique in-game proprietary currency, but then you'll discover something else. The currency is non-refundable, and it is almost impossible to spend all of it. You'll always be left with some random number, like 4 gems or 2 bits of platinum. It's never 0. And this will bother you, because in your mind, that's a waste, and you don't like waste. And if you don't spend that currency, then the game is keeping it, and you've paid for that. But the only way to make this useful is to buy another currency pack. I mean, you'd be a fool if you didn't do that, right? You can't have premium currency just sitting there in strange, unspendable amounts. It's annoying, and it's by design. So add that to the box. But maybe you know all this, and you're not a fool. You won't spend a lot, you'll wait for a...
And as he's saying, like, even if you didn't have an intention to do it, just having that little bit in your inventory can keep you playing until you get to the next thing that you might want to spend the money on. So he's just completely right on, like, the whole, like, psychology of waste not, want not. And that's something that has really plagued my family for a long time, because, like, my grandmother and grandfather grew up during the age of the Great Depression, sort of, like, not, like, literally there, but... because of the influence of the Depression, they were very penny wise, pound foolish, in that they were excellent at like scrimping and saving for like tiny things, but they were very likely to not be able to incorporate like the bigger picture in the things that they did. So like my grandmother would go to like one shop like 10 miles down the road because tomatoes there were 35 cents. So she was saving like 5 cents. Whereas if she went to another store that was like 5 miles down the road. So I thought like my grandma was kind of foolish for a very long time for that reason. But as I've gotten older, it may have just been that grandma may have wanted to go to multiple stores so she didn't have to go back home so quickly, So maybe she wasn't quite as pound foolish as I initially thought. For a little bit of a last protag lore.
sale, but oh look, you're a brand new player and there's an offer, a load of premium currency, a boost, a few cosmetics. It's a limited time offer and it's all for the low price of just under $1. Now you'd definitely be a fool if you didn't buy this. If you've ever wondered why the intro packs to almost any game are such good value, it's because studies have shown people who buy a single purchase are much more likely to make another purchase. So you want to make the first purchase really enticing. And it's because some phones need you to authorize in-app purchases.
It's literally the exact same psychology that drug dealers have when they're like getting new clientele. Like, they don't need to make the first bump extremely expensive because that could put you away from being a returning customer. So get somebody hooked on the drug and they'll come back to you. So that's kind of the exact same thing that's going on here.
But once you have authorized one, it will not double check for any extra purchases. So you confirm that you want to buy the cheap pack, and then it doesn't double check for the expensive packs, because every screen between the player and a purchase is a moment they could doubt and reconsider. So you want to get those, "Are you sure you want to purchase this?" checks agreed with and out the way early. Unusually cheap intro microtransactions just to get you into a habit. Let's add that to the box. And while the box is looking pretty anti-player and anti-consumer so far, it's nowhere near full. To truly see how effective this ugly design can be, we only need to go forward 1 year to 2010 and look at FIFA's Ultimate Team mode. Now, I'm not really into football games, but the FIFA franchise of games actually highlights the game design shift really well. It shows how games have moved from being a fun experience by themselves to a fun enough framework that other monetization tactics will cling to like limpets. In FIFA, you can buy loot boxes, which contain random cards of players, and use these to build up your Ultimate Team. The Ultimate Team mode takes several of the box ideas and combines them, and now the Ultimate Team mode makes more money than the box sales of FIFA itself.
Yeah, that's true, and just kind of absolutely mind-boggling. One, because FIFA is such a mid-game to begin with. Two, because it's such a freaking repackaged game where like you could literally find assets of the previous FIFA games in like the most current versions. I remember there was like 1 year where they literally had the signs that said like whatever, like FIFA 13 when the current game was actually FIFA 14, you know? And literally the graphics were the same. All the players were essentially the same. It's just like skin uniform updates. So like it wasn't necessarily worthy of being an entirely new game. So FIFA has shifted away from being like a game about soccer into being more a game about metagaming in terms of like managing your game roster or like player roster, whatever you want to call them, and doing a lot more like coach or managerial based things. It's become more of a spreadsheet game, which I guess kind of makes a lot of sense when you consider fantasy football. Obviously, fantasy American football, not fantasy worldwide football here, but I think the point still stands. FIFA games are the tyranny of the masses. Don't you mean the opiate of the masses?
In fact, since 2018, FIFA Ultimate Team has generated over $1 billion in revenue per year for EA. In 2021, they made $1.6 billion. And it happens every single year. And the cards you buy in the Ultimate Team for 1 year cannot be used in the next year, meaning the microtransactions now have a shelf life. Horse armor may last forever, but what if it didn't? What if you could make a player pay for it again and again every year? Let's add that to the box. Yearly repeating microtransactions. Now, as a developer, you'd look at this thing, this box, and think, wow, selling my game isn't the profitable thing anymore.
Oh yeah, and also the other thing that goes along with this is that there is the multiplayer online aspect of FIFA to consider. So we do have all of the lessons that we learned from MapleStory at play in FIFA. So how the hell are you going to compete against a team that has Ronaldo and Messi and your favorite star inserted here when you've just got... I won't say anything. I don't want to get anybody too riled up. But let's just say you don't have such stellar players on your team. So you are kind of incentivized to buy into the system, and it becomes a bit of death by 1,000 cuts. It's literally a gacha game, yes. Hey, Chompy, nice to have you again. You don't like games that make you math? Math can be fun if it's done right, but this isn't the math that I enjoy.
it's what I can sell within the game. By now, the box of abusive monetization strategies is so big, it's almost impossible to ignore if you are making a game. 1 year later, in 2011, the MMORPG RuneScape is suffering. They had a major update to the combat system, which a huge majority of the player base hated, and this made them lose a lot of players. This is a mistake worthy of its own video, but the bottom line is, they are a monthly subscription game losing subscribing players, and they need to find a way to either recover paying members or to stem the tide of people leaving.
Yeah, I never really played RuneScape, and the funny thing is, when I was in university, I had a friend who is really, really into RuneScape, and he was trying to gold farm, and what the hell are you doing? Why are you farming gold? Nobody even plays this game. And I'm like, who are you even going to sell this gold to? And then he looks at me completely straight-faced, and he just says, middle schoolers. Just some kid in college is no-lifing this game, literally missing his classes because he's staying up until 3, 4 in the morning, clicking and keeping his frickin' roommate up, just to sell gold to middle schoolers in his mind. Obviously, there's a lot of context that I understand about RuneScape now, which makes, him trying to gold farm even funnier. It's idiot, just buy a bunch of extra computers and set up a bot farm. Don't do this shit manually. But anyway, so my whole point is I don't really understand RuneScape, but I do understand, there's obviously the difference between OSRS and what they had, transitioned to. So maybe I should watch a video about, this topic that JoshStrifeHayes is bringing up, because I don't really know much at all about it, to be honest. If they released a new Armored Core every year, you'd be happy. No, you wouldn't. G6BR, welcome in. Maybe people that love football games like that, it's always up to date. Or like that, it's always up to date. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of it. And I don't really blame them. I just think it's a little bit silly to buy, every years of it. Every year of FIFA that comes out. In some ways, it makes way more sense to me to, wait 1 to 3 years until, the games actually have significant updates. But, that's just kind of me being a bit of a frugal bastard that I am. So, right. You remember running bots in Diablo 2? RuneScape literally keeps Venezuela afloat. You'll need to give some more context to me on that one, Mortis. RuneScape was goated back in the day. Your friend was way more interested, though, and kind of ruined it by excelling way ahead of you. You gotta get good, pony boy. Gotta get good.
The loyalty program. Every month of membership, you now earn loyalty points, and you earn more for every consecutive month that you remain subscribed. And then you can spend loyalty points on cool exclusive cosmetics, or mechanically powerful auras and boosts. So now, cancelling your membership wasn't just a case of thinking, I'm not enjoying the game, so I won't pay, which is a very simple, understandable, fair transaction. It's now a case of thinking, I'm not enjoying the game, but if I unsubscribe, I break my loyalty streak and will earn far fewer loyalty points over the long run, which will put me at a disadvantage if I ever do want to come back in the future, which is no.
Yeah, that's a very smart thing to do from a business perspective. Another smart thing that companies do nowadays, and I'm assuming Josh is going to get to this later on in the video, is kind of incenting players to extend their game time by giving incentive-based rewards for 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, and year-long signups, or obviously discounts and things like that. So I know WoW does that. They give special amounts for 6 month subscribers or something along those lines.
Not as fair. The transaction used to be simple. But now we're putting the player in the position of give money even if you don't want to play because you don't want to break a habit. That's going in the box. And by now the box is demanding a bigger and bigger slice of the game design pie chart. 2 years later, 2013 sees the release of Dead Space 3, the third installment in a terrific horror trilogy. Well, sort of. While Dead Space 1 and 2 were indeed terrific horror games with tension and pacing and balanced gameplay and great stories, Dead Space 3 did something strange. It took the idea of you being a lone engineer trapped on an infested spaceship struggling against incredible odds using only your small collection of mining tools and very limited ammunition to survive, and it added in the ability ability to let you buy in-game guns with real cash from the cash shop.
Oh, man.
Horror survival game selling you in-game guns and ammo, completely defeating the atmosphere and vibe the game was going for.
You know, if this is a single-player game, players get what they deserve. That's all I have to say.
Players things they could use within your game to make the game easier. Let's add that to the box. That's effectively selling power. This one managed...
But I do miss the era of games when you could just add in frickin' cheat codes and they were hard-coded into the game, so you could just have a bunch of different ways to play the game. Like, look at GoldenEye. Like, there were so many stupid modes that didn't really, like, change the game fundamentally, but they just, you know, made it a hell of a lot more fun and a hell of a lot more replayable. Like, Big Head mode, obviously, like, that's kind of easy mode because you'll get a hell of a lot more crits. But paintball mode, super speed mode, like the golden gun mode, all the fun stuff.
Just to out-monetize even the arcade. It would be like putting more coins into Time Crisis and getting a rocket launcher, or removing the time limit in Crazy Taxi. It sort of defeats the purpose of the original game. Along with Dead Space selling guns, we now see the MOBA game Dota 2 release what many consider the first major Battle Pass system. Now, when this craze started, I remember walking into gaming shops and seeing the phrase Battle Pass everywhere, and I had no idea what they were. Effectively, they are optional purchases which unlock a series of challenges or processes you can go through to unlock more stuff in the game, but they are time sensitive. So you buy the monthly battle pass, and if you play a certain number of hours, or kill a certain number of enemies, or achieve a certain number of whatever it wants you to do, you can advance along the battle pass and unlock new stuff. Now,
Alright, Spicy, you have a good night, and thanks for dropping in. So yeah, as Morta says, it's Valve's fault. It's everybody's fault, really. But I really hate battle passes for a variety of reasons. Not only just missing out on the final tiers of rewards in my last season of Destiny 2, but just for reasons beyond that, because I think they artificially inflate player retention metrics. So I think they create this very, very, very negative feedback loop between the players and the devs, for devs to think that the players are interacting with their systems more organically than they really are, because they're incentivizing players to do whatever the hell they need to do to get their rewards, so players are going to do that, which kind of creates a couple problems. One, if the players weren't going to interact with those systems organically, that takes away a bit of the feedback for the devs to realize they might need to tweak some things. But setting that aside, players are also incentivized to work around these inherent systems and cheese them to create the most efficient way to farm out their rewards. So it kind of creates this inherent behavior of degeneracy in the players and really obfuscates how players would normally play the game. And so because of that, I think it really throws off the devs, and they just kind of keep making things worse because they don't have an actual clearer picture of what's going on. Sorry, that's a little bit redundant. Spicy says, as a last message, you've seen a game recently that had a system where you'd keep the battle pass even after the end of the event and can finish it at your own rhythm. Anyway, cheers. Yes, that is true that some games are starting to incorporate those things, and I think that's still a little bit better, but I just don't like the kind of false engagement that I think battle passes create in general. And also, like, if you're already paying for all this shit in the battle pass, why don't you just get the stuff in the battle pass? They're just kind of making it deliberately more inconvenient. And obviously, I am being a little bit hyperbolic here, or exaggerating, in that there should be a kind of reward incentive structure for people to kind of get rewarded. And so they should probably do some activities so it doesn't feel as pay to win. But in some ways, or maybe not pay to win, but like, it does seem a little bit disingenuous that you don't get what you paid for if you didn't meet their kind of arbitrary engagement metrics. Like the Destiny loot cave? Yeah. You reminded of the Photoshopped Elden Ring screenshot with all the most obnoxious UI possible, like microtransactions for buying runes or something. There's probably a battle pass too. I mean, I'll be honest, even though I really do like Elden Ring, I do kind of hate certain systems in the game, like having certain items have a ridiculous low drop rate, which makes sense to me in like a multiplayer online live service subscription style game, but it's just a little bit tedious in a single player game where you're not really going to affect other people so much. Obviously, there is a little bit of the online stuff, but it's not that big a deal.
You could just have the unlockable stuff be available for everyone to unlock anyway, but by limiting it to a timed battle pass, you're doing a few manipulative things. You're creating a fear of missing out, or FOMO, as players know if they don't have this month's battle pass, they may never get the full experience or that rare cosmetic ever again. So you are encouraging an unhealthy amount of gameplay, because if you're not advancing your battle pass, you're losing precious time. So now you're actually discouraging players from enjoying any other game and forcing them to focus entirely on progression within yours. This design is of course at odds with the limit playtime technique, because they appeal to different demographics. Remember,
Right, and I think this dynamic that Josh Strife just highlighted also is kind of what I would compare to like how a lot of companies look at short-term profits rather than long-term healthy profits. So I do think the way that battle passes operate for a lot of games inadvertently ends up causing a lot more players to burn out on these products. So even if they weren't necessarily going to play through like the full battle pass initially on their own, I think when they're kind of forced to do it, it's an overall negative experience and kind of disincentivizes them from coming back once they kind of get fed up with what is being shoveled down their throats. So Future Warrior 123, welcome back to the stream. You remember when you were really into Fate Grand Order? You're glad to be done with gacha games? Yeah. And Sinclair says, if they make you pay for it, they should give you all the products advertised. I agree, but yeah. It's either you get all the stuff that you pay for, like right off the bat, and you just kind of like live with the fact that you just paid for all the stuff, or maybe like the fact that they have the battle pass, like, hides it so it feels like you're still working for something even though, you know, you're the scum of the earth and just bought additional content. Companies have golden parachutes 9 out of 10 times, so there's no incentive for long-term healthy profit models. I don't think companies do. I think you mean like executives do. Investor system incentivizes pumps and dumps. True. Konami isn't much better when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! Sag. Is it Konami that does the pachinko stuff now? I don't remember. Okay, they are. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, as far as like the whole executive aspect and the market incentivizations of like making these games turn over short-term profits, I do think it really harms like the game's health and longevity overall, where if the games were just better, people would be more inclined to spend money. But obviously that kind of goes into the catch-22 of if they make the game better, they have less things to monetize, so they'll make less money overall, so they wouldn't make a game better, which is a real pain in the ass.
A battle pass or limited time progression track doesn't always actively improve a game, but it does always increase that game's revenue, so throw it in the box. By now, even the concept of a fun, well-made game is starting to look like a horrifically augmented shadow of its former self. Imagine what a well-made game would look like if you tried to shoehorn in all of the techniques in this box. And unfortunately, eventually, you won't need to imagine. We're seeing it more and more. Later that same year, one of my favourite games comes out. Assassin's Creed Black Flag, a fantastic pirate game. There's just one problem. Unless you own both a PlayStation and an Xbox and are willing to buy 2 copies of the game, you can never experience the full game. Black Flag featured console-exclusive levels, which not only fueled the petty console wars, but also highlighted the fact that marketing executives were now powerful enough to tell games developers exactly what their players deserved, or more importantly, what their non-players don't deserve. This is not player.
Yeah, I had no idea about this. I mean, it makes sense. I have kind of complicated, mixed feelings about like the console wars and stuff. I think overall they're kind of good because they incentivize competition, and so like no one company controls the market. But I mean, PC has also been a thing for quite a while now, and we're not really like fully monopolized, but who knows, if somebody did have all the cookies in the cookie jar, they could probably pay for the price of admission.
Focused design at all. And while I completely understand the power of console exclusives, when I walked into a game shop and picked up 2 copies of Black Flag and realised no matter what I choose there is a mission I won't get to play because I don't have the right console, that didn't leave a good taste in my mouth. So while Dota may have started the Battle Pass idea, it was almost perfected 4 years later in 2017 by Fortnite Season 2, which replaced the Season shop with a Battle Pass system. And then later in November of 2017 we witness a bit of gaming history, and it fills us all with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Star Wars Battlefront 2 was an amazing game which released back in 2005, not to be confused with Star Wars Battlefront 2, which was a mediocre game which released in 2017. It was a full-priced game and yet also had a loot box system in it along with premium currency system. This led to a Reddit user complaining that even though they'd bought the $80 deluxe version of the game, they still couldn't play as Darth Vader from day one. Unlocking Darth Vader means buying his hero crate, which costs 60,000 in-game credits, or you can spend real money. Now, you can earn an average of 250 credits per 10-minute match at the time, so you'd have to grind for roughly 40 hours of constant gameplay, longer than the average completion time of most video games, to unlock a single rare character. Or you could pay crystals in the premium shop and spend those on hero crates and just hope. EA responded to this Reddit complaint saying the reason crates were so expensive or take so long to unlock is to give a sense of pride and accomplishment to players who did manage to unlock them. This becomes the most downvoted comment in Reddit history. So, locking premium parts of your full-priced game behind.
And just for a little bit of context, and this is my favorite thing about this post, is when you look at how many awards it has, it seems counterintuitive that like this post is so terrible. It's literally disliked by over 500,000 people. Why the hell are people giving it rewards or awards? The answer is when a negative voted post has awards given to it, it doesn't become automatically hidden. So by rewarding this post, they keep its visibility up, which allows people to continue to downvote it. So I just love the absolute pettiness of the Redditors who gave it awards.
Pride and accomplishment to players who did manage to unlock them. This becomes the most downvoted comment in Reddit history. So, locking premium parts of your full-priced game behind either hours of grind or spending even more money to unlock the cool stuff before other people who bought the same game as you. Now, it's important to understand that games having things locked within them is not necessarily bad design. One of my favourite games of all time is SSX Tricky, the snowboarding game. And as you play through that, you unlock new characters, new boards, and new tracks. Progression within a game and rewarding that progression with new mechanics, new characters, and new areas is not bad. The problem was progression wasn't the only way to unlock this. You could simply pay more money to get it immediately. And because it was a competitive game, people who paid the extra money were at an advantage over those who did not. This is a video about how newer games feel wrong, and it feels wrong to buy the same game as someone else and to know that they will have an advantage over you if they pay more. Throw that in the box of abusive monetization. Why not? It's going to work. And then 5 years later, Diablo Immortal happened. Now, I've already covered Diablo Immortal pretty extensively in the video The Diabolically Immoral Diablo Immortal and its follow-up about the legendary crests, because it took basically every idea from the big box of abusive monetization and sprinkled them liberally over a somewhat Diablo-looking game, including multiple premium currencies, a deliberately similar in-game item which functions slightly differently to a paid version of the same thing, crafting, and multiple battle passes all called different things. But don't worry, because everyone assured me that Diablo Immortal was a mobile game, and thus would not be representative of the actual next Diablo game, which would be Diablo 4. Everyone told me Diablo 4 would be a full game by itself, with no cash shop, with gameplay first, and none of the strategies from the big box of badness. So of course...
Man, can you guys get a whiff of that copium that's going on right there? I sure can. Diablo Immortal's situation is hilarious to Mortis because the guy spent so much money he couldn't matchmake because he was too strong. Is that the dude that like spent 40 grand, or did that person spend even more? I mean, obviously they spent more over time, but I don't remember when that story broke and how much they spent.
Of course, there are various digital versions of the game, the more expensive ones giving you an accelerated battle pass bonus allowing you to progress quicker, and there is a cosmetic cash shop using its own proprietary currency. And if you're...
Yeah, I knew somebody spent like 100,000, and like even the stupidest thing about that is in 3 months or whatever, when like the next season rotates, like that dude is going to be completely power scaled out of wherever the hell they were. Makes you really glad that companies like FromSoft make a beginning to end game like the good old days. Oh, beginning to end a game like the good old days. A little bit of a weaker ending for a lot of their games, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Thinking Diablo doesn't need all these extra bells and whistles to be a good Diablo game, you are correct. These have not been added because they make the game better, they've been added because they make the game money. And then Darktide released, which is a full price game with an abusively priced cash shop. Or you can grind for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to get some of the cheap things in that shop. And now we're here. So why have games become like this? Simple, because games are businesses. Games have been businesses since arcades, since consoles allowed you to buy the game and have it in your own home. They have always wanted to make money. But up until now, the best way to make the most amount of money was to make the best game you possibly could because people would buy it, and that was it. The transaction was finished. It was fair. The best way to make money on modern games is to make the best framework as a holder for these strategies. And companies have experimented with various methods to increase income over the years, from gacha loot boxes to pre-orders, console exclusives to battle passes, energy systems to just straight up selling power. And instead of hiring game designers, they hired psychologists to build habits, to reinforce addictive behaviors, to design gameplay loops which encourage spending. The problem was these techniques were never about the player having fun. They were about the user being monetized. And when a marketing executive pictures you playing a game, you aren't pictured smiling and laughing with friends. You're pictured opening your wallet and reaching for your credit card, because that's their goal. And eventually, the Pandora's box of abusive monetization strategies was so full of proven, effective techniques that making a game is often no longer about the game, at least not for the people in charge of the money. The game is now simply a life support system for as many of these systems as you can design into it. The game is a host, and the parasite of monetization has begun to take over, and the unfortunate reality is this works. Even with a breakout incredible success like Elden Ring, which won Game of the Year and sold over 18 million copies as of this video, at $60 a sale, that's over $1 billion in sales worldwide, that is still slightly shy of how much money Genshin Impact made this year. It is still shy of how much money FIFA Ultimate Team has made every year for the last 4 years. The reality is, when companies look at that pie chart of game development time and how they divide developer time or invested money, that big box of abusive monetization strategies, that Pandora's box of terribleness is so effective, they would be hurting their own profit to not put at least some of the techniques in. The older designers...
Exactly, and I think it really just comes down to whether or not a developer is in the business of business or in the business of making games. And obviously the lines have become extremely blurred as of recently. But even in the beginning, the business was more of a business with the whole coin op situation. But adding in the social components for a lot of these games has, I think, made things a lot worse, because it really preys on people's insecurities or desires to show off and all of that other stuff, which will cause them to be more likely to turn to like negative behaviors rather than the old skill-based coin op style where you're paying 25 cents for an extra life, and whatever happened with that life, you kind of got what you got, you know? And Now, as I was mentioning earlier, with the inundation of extra content, it becomes even more difficult to know that what you're getting is what you're going to end up with. And as I said before, like, you might be satisfied with what you have now, but you're just kind of on a conveyor belt chasing a carrot, not really realizing that the conveyor belt is moving beneath your feet and that the carrot changes forms to, I don't know, like a cupcake after a certain set amount of time. So it's just kind of been a bit of death by 1,000 cuts, where players have grown more accustomed to paying for things over time, which has made it become normalized now. So, like, I cannot personally believe how many players go through like the gacha games like Genshin Impact and like Fate Grand Order, just because like I see those games and I feel like I'm being screwed over out of like what could be a better experience due to like a lot of the gacha based systems. But that's me personally, and I choose to not really interact with those games because I don't want to get hooked on it, because I just know how scummy it feels to me. And it sucks, but I'm not really going to condemn others for like playing those games, because a lot of these people that play these games are just doing it to pass a bit of time and relax, and they don't want to think about it too much. Goblin core all the way. Nice posture checks, everyone. The creative vision of a game will also automatically suffer. Just imagine an evil alternate reality where Bandai forced Miyazaki to put any of this in. I don't think so. I mean, let's look at a game like Death Stranding. Don't you think that it was a mistake for them to take out all those monster cans in the director's cut? I do. They should have cut them in. Stella has to wonder if it's driving some of the nostalgia for older games because they feel less predatory. I think that is part of it, and I'm glad you brought that up because that reminded me that I want to talk about games like Baldur's Gate 3. So many people bought Baldur's Gate 3 out of the principle of it being a kind of complete game, which is just so sad and ironic that we've come to the point where we need to pedestalize the games that are just games at this point. Hey, Clown Scum, you're late. How spicy was this one? It's an interesting question because I don't necessarily think like the video is that spicy. It's just maybe it is like it's full of cold takes, but boy does it rile everyone up. So it's a fair amount of spice, I guess. All right.
Simply didn't have the knowledge of this box, and even if they did, they didn't have the technology to act on it at the time. Modern design often puts the player into an awkward position where the game has spent more time focusing on the manipulative, abusive systems than it has on just being the best game it could be. So what is the exact choice which makes games feel wrong? Is it MapleStory's fault for adding Gachapon? Is it Oblivion's fault for the horse armor? Is it Dota's fault for the battle pass? FIFA's fault for the success of Ultimate Team? Is it Farmville's fault for mastering the addiction cycle? Or is it EA's fault for locking away Darth Vader? Unfortunately,
I think it's definitely the player's fault for allowing this stuff to continue, and you could argue like a societal level fault for not having more regulations to protect their consumers, which kind of makes this type of predatory behavior continue to exist as it does, and continue to get worse and even more predatory over time.
it's kind of all of them. It's just the reality of games design today. You cannot close the lid on Pandora's box. Designers can't unknow the effectiveness of these techniques. And every game made for the rest of time has to either use them or actively choose to avoid them. So the exact choice that makes a game go from being the best it can possibly be to anti-player or anti-consumer is when a designer or a marketing executive stops thinking about how they can make the best game they're capable of and starts throwing some sly glances toward the box in the corner. And when they say, hey, this technique may not fit our game perfectly, but it's proven to make a lot of money. Do you think we could put it in our game? That is the moment any specific game goes downhill from what it could be from a player's perspective. And the worst part is that big evil box and all its dark design knowledge is constantly being added to. And when you play a new game and spot the cash shop and the battle pass and the premium currency and the awkward pack size and the loot boxes and the exclusive levels, and when you just feel sad that the game didn't have to do that, that's when you know that the pie chart of design of this game had at least a small slice dedicated to that stupid box. A small slice focused on making the game a little bit anti-player in the name of a lot of profit. But personally, I also know it can be very cathartic to be angry at a thing instead of a concept, so let's all just collectively agree to blame the stupid horse. Cheers for watching. Another massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon, Twitch and YouTube who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and our Discord. And as
that damn horse. All right, I'm going to go ahead and link his video into chat. I thought it was a really good one. Definitely learned a lot about some of these games and their practices, like the Maple story kind of introducing Gachapon surprised me. But I do think you could make the argument that Gachapon affected gamers outside of the video game sphere when we look at older style games, tabletops with Magic the Gathering being probably the most prolific example of that. Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, all that kind of stuff. Metal Fingers, welcome back to the stream. And then Future Warrior 123 asks, in a fight to the death, who do you think would win, Radagon or Gwyn? So that's an interesting question, and I think if we were to say in their final boss fight when we encounter them, then Radagon would probably wipe the floor with Gwyn, not just mechanically speaking, but Gwyn has been charred to ash, essentially, and given more or less all of his souls to his followers, so he is at a much weakened state than I think Radagon ever was. Sinclair says, one of the few things they like about Genshin is that each expansion's free. You pretty much ignore all the gacha crap. Okay. Radagon moves faster. Yeah, I think just from a lore perspective, if we're talking about at the end of their reigns, then Radagon is probably stronger than Gwyn. But before that, Gwyn is like, if they're both at the height of their power, then Gwyn might win. Because, Radagon is yet to be a god and all that fun stuff. All right, so yeah, that was a good video by JoshStrifeHayes. I'm going to like it. Make sure you guys give him a like and or a sub if you enjoyed it as well.
as always, have a great day.
All right, now next we're going to move into a couple of videos by a human Justicar. I have not watched anything from this channel yet, so I'm kind of curious to see where we're going to go. And this first one is, where are the missing Karian princesses? Elden Ring lore and theory. So this is something that I've wondered as well, so let's go ahead and dive on in.
The Carian royal family once ruled over Liurnia in the
Karian.
lands between. Their queen was Rennala, who was the head of both their house and the famed Academy of Raya Lucaria. Rennala's first and only husband was Lord Radagon, and they had 3 children together, her sons Radon and Rykard, and her daughter, Ranni. On the surface, this is where the Carian royal story ends. But what of the missing Carian princesses? Hello everyone, I am a human Justicar, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing the mysteries of the Carian royal family. If you have not already, I'd highly recommend watching my latest video, as I will be making references to it multiple times throughout this one. Also, if you aren't subscribed to my channel yet but enjoy my videos, you should do so by clicking subscribe down below. We are over 2,000 strong and still growing every day, so thank you all for your continued support. There will be major spoilers ahead, so please continue at your own risk. The Carian filigreed crest is a talisman adorned with the royal crest, an honor said to have once been awarded to Carian knights who served as direct retainers to the kingdom's princesses. Now, there is only one princess, Ranni, daughter of Rennala. First, let's establish what this
build is going on. So 44, a Dex user. Spicy.
Ranni, daughter of Rennala. First, let's establish what a princess is. Historically, a princess is a female member of the ruling monarch's direct line, either daughters or granddaughters. Additionally, the spouse of a prince would also take on the title of princess. This is not, however, an absolute. Royal titles and who inherits them are extremely varied based upon each individual kingdom's rules. For example, when Radagon married Queen Renala, he was given the title of Lord, something confirmed by Pastor Muriel's dialogue.
Yeah, and Radagon also married into the Karian royal line, so that's kind of an interesting thing. It's not as though, like, he became the patriarch of that society. Renala was still the queen, so he was, in a way, subservient to her, even though it seems as though he's still kind of called the shots, with obviously her kind of, being brokenhearted later. But even before that, with the masks of confidence, it seems like Radagon was silencing all of the Karian servants and whatnot. So then, Future Warrior asks, if the DLC proves successful enough, do you think Elden Ring will get a proper sequel or remain standalone like Bloodborne, despite its success? Honestly, I have no idea, and there is certainly a lot of potential for them to turn this into a series of games, but I think it really just depends on what the studio wants to do and whether or not they want to continue to expand their horizons or just keep refining the formula that they've been working on over time. Obviously, with like Armored Core and its kind of success as well, it makes it more difficult to see what direction they want to move next, especially since we had Sekiro be its own standalone game without any expansion level DLCs. And of course, with Clown Scum saying they've mentioned in video or in interviews that they want to expand Elden Ring more, there is the possibility that they could do things beyond the medium of video games, and they could branch out into stuff like manga. Well, they do have the manga, anime, and like movies or TV shows. All right, so going back to the video.
After his second marriage to Queen Marika, however, his title was changed from Lord Radagon to King Consort Radagon. This is but one small example of the different set of rules each kingdom followed. It makes sense, though, as to why Ranni is recognized with the title of princess, since she is the direct offspring of a ruling monarch, Queen Renala of Caria. Sir Gideon Ofnir describes her as Lunar Princess Ranni, daughter to Renala. Rogier also identifies her after examining the black knife print, calling her Lunar Princess Ranni, one of the children born to King Consort Radagon and his first wife, Renala. It is her mother's position as the Carian queen which gives her this title, unlike the demigod status bestowed upon her and her brothers. Radon and Rykard's Great Rune description state that they became demigod stepchildren after Radagon's union with Queen Marika. We are left to assume that the same is true for Princess Ranni, since we don't receive the same type of clarification because her Great Rune was cast aside. Although Radon and Rykard are also the offspring of Renala, they are never referred to as princes. Queen Renala and Lord Radagon's sons were instead given titles that fit the roles they each played in society in the lands between. General Radon, who commanded an army in the Caelid Wilds, and Praetor Rykard, who served as a magistrate. Queen Renala is neither a god nor a demigod, but she is still a ruler, so her children should have all received the titles of prince and princess, but that's simply not the case.
I don't necessarily know about that, and I think one thing which differentiates Ranni from Rykard and Radon is that Ranni is still kind of directly associated with the Carians by the virtue of being within the estate of Caria Manor, whereas Rykard and Radon have struck out on their own, sort of, and they seem to be standing on their own 2 feet, definitely relatively speaking here. And them being princes of the Carian royal family may not have been as integral to their characterization as we find them in the final builds of the game compared to where we see Ranni and obviously her relation to Renala specifically. So, were they princes? I think so. I mean, I don't really see a reason why they shouldn't be. I just think that with them interacting more with Leyndell and being like kind of generals and adjudicators for the army and whatnot, that their status as princes were kind of secondary to the honor they gained in like the main stay religion of the land and whatnot.
This could be because the Carians, who worshipped and followed the full moon, practiced a matriarchal system of leadership. This would mean that women, predominantly mothers, would hold the power and authority in both society and government. The moon and its cyclical nature is thought to be connected to feminine energy, and even in some indigenous cultures, the moon is referred to as Grandmother Moon. The Dark Moon Greatsword's description also hints at this being the case. A moon greatsword bestowed by a Karian queen upon her spouse to honor long-standing tradition. This being called a long-standing tradition leads me to believe that the Carians, because of their beliefs, would only accept a queen as their leader, making the daughter of the queen her heir, not her sons. This could explain the lack of title given to Radon and Rykard, but it doesn't answer the main question. Who were the Karian princesses? Though Ranni is the only Karian princess we ever encounter in the game, it does seem like there were once many others. The discarded palace key is the key discarded by Lunar Princess Ranni alongside her very flesh. Opens a treasure chest passed down to Karian princesses. Now, we could make the argument that Renala herself was once a princess, and therefore the chest could also have been passed down to her. But there's one major problem with that. As we've discussed in my previous videos, the Remembrance of the Full Moon Queen states that Renala was a prominent champion, and eventually became the head of the academy and established her house as royalty. The word established implies that she was the first monarch of Caria, crowning herself as its first queen. That would mean that the only princesses to the kingdom would have had to have been either Renala's daughters or granddaughters. It is possible that Renala had daughters prior to her marriage with Radagon, a theme we see with another prominent figure, First Elden Lord Godfrey. Even though Nefelilu's ancestors were not considered demigods, they still were descendants from Godfrey, or Horalu, and as such, she is able to claim his throne at Stormveil Castle. It wouldn't be that surprising if Renala, prior to marrying Lord Radagon, already had daughters of her own, and once she established herself as queen, they each became Karian princesses. So where are these princesses now? Well, nobody knows for certain, but there are some subtle clues that may give us an answer, though it won't be a happy one.
Alright, so just for a bit of reference here, when we look at the Remembrance of the Full Moon Queen, oh no, not that one. What's the other one that I just looked up? Oh yeah, the long-standing tradition. So it's like what, the Dark Moon Greatsword? Yeah, okay. We make this bigger. When we look at the Dark Moon Greatsword's description, it says it's bestowed by a Karian queen to her spouse on a long-standing tradition here. That's a little bit of a liberalization in the localization. So the Japanese just says that the queens, or well, princesses of Karia's magic generation, they are said to bestow a great sword of the moon onto their spouses. So it's not necessarily a long-standing tradition here, and it is also listed as hearsay, but I think it may have become a tradition like once Ranni gave it to the Tarnished, perhaps. But even with that being said, we still don't actually know about the other Karian princesses, and it is confirmed that we do have the other Karian princesses with the Karian filigree, which I believe was like shown at the very beginning of this video here. So I see you guys are having some issues trying to figure out whether or not Radagon and Marika were two different bodies. Well, the good news is there is no good news, and you're welcome in the club. That is something that comes up quite often in these streams and even in the Discord. So, yeah, we don't really know. It's arguable. My opinion is I haven't seen enough evidence to suggest that Radagon was ever truly his own separate being. So I'm just going to go with what we have right now and say that they're probably just one body. And Wesley Sosa, welcome back to the stream. Princess Rani indeed. Wasn't Karian an actual nation in real life? I don't think so. Morty says, you do think that Liurnia is matriarchal, so you think Radon and Rykard are considered princess. But you do think they are considered princess. Yeah, okay. It's amazing what gets lost in translation. It's also amazing what gets added in translation.
The entrance of the Church of the Cuckoo, there is an illusionary wall which hides a courtyard. In this hidden courtyard are several stone coffins, each one adorned with a young maiden statue.
Wait, I can't read again. For some reason, I thought... Why did I think this was the Ma character? Yeah, Rekidai is totally... Like, successive generations of the Karian princesses are said to give swords to their spouses. So, I do take back part of what I said, where it's not necessarily a long-standing tradition. Well, I mean, it's kind of yes and kind of no here. So, with these characters, you can take the understanding that it should have been like multiple generations, but it could literally just mean Renala and Rani, so there is a bit of ambiguity in the text there. And even with that being said, it is listed as hearsay with the Toyu, so it's arguable, I guess, in multiple ways. Sorry about that. Let me back up.
Illusionary wall which hides a courtyard.
Right, let me back up a little bit more.
The Church of the... It won't be a happy one. At the entrance of the Church of the Cuckoo, there is an illusionary wall which hides a courtyard. In this hidden courtyard are several stone coffins, each one adorned with a young maiden statue. If you look closely while traversing the halls of Raya Lucaria, you'll see more of these same coffins lined up against the walls. These particular coffins are unique from all the others scattered across the lands between.
Yes and no, and I'll talk about it a bit more if she doesn't go into full detail.
Master Iji, the one who carries the Karian filigreed crest for the player to purchase, tells us of the war between the Cuckoo and the Karians.
This territory once belonged to the Carian royal family. Their manor lies not far beyond this point. When the Raya Lucaria Academy turned on the Karians, the Knights of the Cuckoo descended on this tract.
Behind the Karian manor, on the opposite side of the Three Sisters, is a large graveyard. There you'll find the answer to a puzzle, the Liurnian artist shack's painting. The one found in the shack is said to be reminiscent of a painting titled Resurrection. This painter is said to have captured the landscape scene during the last moments of those welcomed into death's embrace. Now, the shack itself is found extremely close to Rani's divine tower, so the painting could be referring to her physical death and resurrection. But the painting does not look over the divine tower. Instead, it looks over Raya Lucaria, and the reward you receive for solving this puzzle is the Juvenile Scholar set. These robes were worn by young Academy scholars, and as discussed in my last video, these juveniles are all birthed anew by the amber egg of Queen Renala. Yet, another point I made in my latest video is that rebirth cannot take place without death occurring first, and resurrection is the act of bringing someone who is dead back to life. The description
I do think this is a little bit arguable about like the death thing, although even with destined death being sealed, there is still kind of some forms of death within the lands between, so she might be right here. So it says like rebirth is asleep to them, and with each awakening memory fades into oblivion. So She might be right because Renala does turn some of the scholars into like gravestones to be better born anew and all that, but I don't really know if that's a necessary component because the Tarnished can be reborn anew, but I guess the Tarnished can die all the time, so I don't know. Anyway, to go back to the whole thing with the sarcophagi, she mentioned the ones in Raya Lucaria are unique, and she's kind of right, but also kind of wrong in that when you go into Elphael and by the Millennia boss fight specifically, you also have similar sarcophagi in general. It's just like the statue on them changes. So the sarcophagus shows up other places as well. This one doesn't have a corpse on it, but this is in like the prayer room in Elphael. And it's even shared in common with the soulless demigods in the Wandering Mausoleums. So, if the important thing is the Raya Lucarian figure on it, she is correct, but for what it's worth, like, that could just be a statue and not, like, truly representative of anything. So even with that being said, does that mean that those are Karian princesses in the tombs? I don't necessarily know. If so, it seems like there were definitely a lot of them. So maybe she's making the point that they could have been the juvenile scholars? I don't know. We'll see.
Continues. Rebirth is as sleep to them, and with each awakening, memory fades into oblivion. The juvenile scholars found in the Grand Library are noted as children born anew by Renala, but they aren't directly called Renala's children in the same way that the other three are. Despite this, it could be that they've forgotten who they once were through the countless times they've been reborn. So I'll ask you this. Do you think the coffins in Raya Lucaria hold the bodies of the missing Karian princesses? Or are they perhaps the many reborn juvenile scholars singing a lullaby to their mother in the Grand Library?
Sleep tight, bound tight by mother's hand.
Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a thumbs up down below. Please leave any corrections, suggestions, and any questions you have down in the comments. I always try to be active in the comment section as much as I can, so feel free to post down there. If you want to know how you can support my channel, you can always buy me a coffee to help fuel these late night script writing sessions. The link is in my description. I appreciate all of your continued support on my channel, and as always, I can't wait to talk to you all on the next one. Bye!
Alright, so I think that was a pretty good self-contained video. I'm going to go ahead and give it a like, and I will share it with you guys in the chat as usual. So yeah, even with all that being said, I'm not entirely sure that I would buy that the little children are the other princesses of Caria, but I do think that's a very interesting solution since we're not told who those princesses were. Some people believe that Sellen should count amongst them, although I think that is more or less directly contradicted in the Carian filigree, which says that Lunar Princess Ranni is the last of the princesses. And so, if Ranni exists and Sellen exists, that should imply that Sellen is not a princess if Ranni is the last one. Or the only one, whatever it says. Alright, so okay. Let's go ahead and move on into her next video on Radagon of the Golden Order's complete timeline. Oh yeah, and I wanted to joke about the Queen Ronaldo of Korea auto sub. Okay, here we go.
In the lands between, there is one who is known as the red-haired champion, the Leal Hound of the Golden Order, the second Elden Lord and king consort to Queen Marika, Radagon of the Golden Order. But who is Radagon? Where does he come from? And what mysteries or skeletons lurk in his closet? Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I am a human Justicar, and today is the first installment of videos where we'll be diving into the character of Radagon of the Golden Order. This video has been in the draft since before my Destined Death video, which was 10 months ago. This topic is so big that I decided halfway through writing this script that it'll have to be divided into separate videos. So make sure to come back for part 2 on my theories when it comes out.
Yeah, I definitely understand the delays in making a video about this topic.
There will be many spoilers ahead, so please proceed at your own risk. Radagon is a figure veiled in mystery. Everything that we know about him is extremely vague and, at times, contradictory. After beating the game, I felt as though I was left with more questions than answers. So to try and answer my many burning questions, I started by creating a timeline. It starts with a quick summary of what I like to call the pre-Radagon era.
Oh boy, here we go. You're always in for a treat when somebody tries to make a timeline of Elden Ring. Not to say that like my timelines are any better, it's just like you know they definitely fallen down the rabbit hole if they even bother trying to do that.
Before rising to godhood, Queen Marika, who is of the Newman race, was chosen by the Two Fingers, envoys of the Greater Will, making her an Empyrean. Queen Marika was then given a shadow, Malekith. Before establishing the Golden Order, Queen Marika plucked the Rune of Death, or Destined Death, out of the Elden Ring, and had Malekith lock it away into his blade. This is described by the remembrance of the Black Blade. Malekith was a shadow-bound beast given to his Empyrean. Marika's sole need of her shadow was a vessel to lock away Destined Death. We can confirm the order of these events because of Enya's dialogue. The Rune of Death goes by 2 names. The other is Destined Death, the Forbidden Shadow, plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation. After creating the Golden Order, Queen Marika took a consort, a warrior named Horalu, and began to wage war on all of the Erd Tree's enemies. The incantation Protection of the Erd Tree's description reads, "In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erd Tree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order." Horalu took on the name Godfrey, as well as the beast Sorosh onto his back as part of his vow as the Elden Lord. Godfrey's icon states, Godfrey was a ferocious warrior. When he vowed to become a lord, he took the beast regent Sorosh upon his back, to suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within. The biggest and most significant battle Godfrey fought was the war against the giants. This war was waged in an attempt to destroy the fell god, or the Flame of Ruin as it's later called by Enya and Melina. Queen Marika's own words tell us the story.
Hark, brave warriors. Hark, my lord Godfrey. We commend your deeds. Guidance hath delivered ye through each ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erd Tree.
You know, I might need to think about that idea of guidance guiding Godfrey and his soldiers into the war with the fire giants a bit more. And so I think that should imply that the Erd Tree was already a thing then, although obviously guidance could predate the Erd Tree based on the very little that we know. But anyway, Crunchy, welcome back to the stream. Nice to have you again. So Future Warrior and Sinclair were asking whether or not the Japanese is clearer about the state of the curse on Radagon and whether the Japanese implies he is more of a giant or if he was just cursed by the giants. The not so good news is it's ambiguous. but the Japanese leaves more ambiguity in the text to say that it's more likely to just be a curse of the giants rather than implying that Radagon himself is a giant. So I've talked about this in previous streams. So like the final line here says, perhaps it was a curse of the giants. It is said Radagon despaired at his own red hair. So is he himself a giant? Arguable, but at the very least, if he is cursed, it seems to be a curse of the giants, but not necessarily cursed to be a giant. But good questions. All right, going back.
Elden Lord Godfrey and his army of warriors would be victorious over the giants and would continue to wage wars all across the lands between. There were 2 more significant battles Godfrey personally fought in. As his armor states, the age of the Erd Tree began a monk's conflict when Godfrey was lord of the battlefield. He led the war against the giants, faced the Stormlord alone, and then there came a moment when his last worthy enemy fell, and it was then, as the story is told, that the hue of Lord Godfrey's eyes faded. This is a quick reminder to subscribe to my channel if you're not already, and if you're enjoying this video, to hit the thumbs up button down below. Thanks! Now sometime between the war against the giants and Godfrey's final victory at Castle Morn, the 2 Liurnian Wars took place. This is when we hear the second Elden Lord mentioned for the very first time. The first Liurnian War was seemingly won by a champion named Radagon. The sword monument states, "The first Liurnian War. Radagon's glory burns red as his hair." The use of the word glory indicates that Radagon was victorious and renowned in some way for his part in the war. The Erdtree incantation Barrier of Gold also...
I think that sword monument in the Japanese just says like Radagon becomes a hero, but not really that big of a deal.
also mentions Radagon, stating, "This incantation was used by the champions of the Erdtree in the First and the Second Liurnian Wars, during which the red-haired Radagon joined the heroes' ranks." I bring all of this up because this is the earliest mention of Radagon I've been able to find in the game. Before the First Liurnian War, Radagon was never mentioned. This either means he didn't exist, wasn't born yet, or was insignificant up until the point that he joined the heroes' ranks in the First Liurnian War. It's unclear what the Golden Order gained from this victory, but not long after, a Karian sorceress and champion would rise up in the Academy of Raya Lucaria.
So Crunchy says there's a question as to why Godfrey didn't lead the Liurnian Wars, which might indicate that they were synchronous with the war against the giants. That's an interesting thought that I hadn't really considered, and part of that is because when we look at the sigil for the Barrier of Gold, we have the sigil of the, not ancient worship, of the current modern Erdtree worship, which indicates to me that it would be later in the timeline than the war against the giants, because of quite a few things. Like, trying to think. Let me look at the incantations. All right. I pulled up Vextra, so, general don't trust Vextra implicitly disclaimer here, but nonetheless, when we look at the Erdtree incantations, no, there's not too much important going on. But when we get to the modern Erdtree worship, oh man, they don't actually differentiate them. That's kind of really annoying. It would suggest to me that they're part of different ages, sort of. Well, not literally here. So I think when you get the Barrier of Gold type stuff, it's supposed to be indicative of the blessings of the Erdtree fading or whatnot. And obviously there's a lot of questions surrounding that with some people thinking that these incantations didn't appear until after the Shattering because of Wrath of Gold, which says it appeared after the Shattering, but I don't think that's how that works, because the Shattering couldn't have happened before Radagon married Renala to have the Karian children. So anyway, Tony Pepperoni, welcome back in. Maybe he was fighting the Stormlord and all that stuff. Yeah, so maybe. It is questionable where Godfrey is during this time. I think the Pangea theory for Elden Ring probably holds some weight, and I don't think Godfrey needed to cut through Liurnia to get down to either Caelid or Limgrave or even like the Weeping Peninsula. So I think he was just off on a campaign in a different direction than Radagon was, because we are told by Muriel at least that Godfrey is still kind of in the lands between when Radagon first appears, at least. And then Sinclair had said, given that there was a tree before the Erd Tree and a different lord, it stands to reason that the guidance was around before the current iteration of the Erd Tree. That's very arguable because, while we do see remnants of something that is grace-like within the Forbidden Lands, we also see a couple of like aura-type things in Raya Lucaria, which are almost like a blue guidance of grace. So these kind of weird guidance of graces might not be the same thing. They might not have had like the same role as the current guidance does, at least. All right, going back to the video.
And establish herself and her line as royalty. The Remembrance of the Full Moon Queen states, in her youth, Renala was a prominent champion who charmed the Academy with her lunar magic, becoming its master. She also led the Glintstone Knights and established the House of Caria as royalty. With Renala at the head of both the Karian army and the Academy of Raya Lucaria, Radagon once again descended upon Liurnia in the Second Liurnian War. Pastor Muriel explains this.
Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host. When he met Lady Renala in battle, he soon repented his territorial aggressions there, and became husband to the Karian queen.
It would seem that Renala's lunar magic was not only able to charm the Academy, but also Radagon.
He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host.
Some have interpreted this to mean he came to the lands between, but I think what Pastor Muriel was referring to is Liurnia when he says these lands. Regardless, this outcome is vastly different from the outcome of the First Liurnian War. The Sword Monument reads, the Second Liurnian War, no victory for the Golden, nor for the Moon, no prize but atonement, the birth of a vow. This leads us straight into the marriage of Lord Radagon and Lady Renala.
So, Future Warrior said they figured that the War of the Giants happened before because Radagon would have had to have been cursed with the red hair by the time he fought Renala. And that is also depending on whether or not he was actually cursed, but that is another thing to bring up in conjunction with the idea of Radagon's appearance onto the scene being after the War against the Giants. So yeah, that's a good observation.
Lord Radagon ceased his violent campaign on Liurnia and instead became the Lord of Caria by proxy of his marriage to Queen Renala. The marriage was widely perceived as something to celebrate, as shown by the description of the full moon crossbow. Made to celebrate the matrimonial union and reconciliation between the houses of the Erd Tree and the full moon, Leyndell and Raya Lucaria. Reconciliation means to restore friendly relations, which is exactly what Radagon intended for at the Church of Vows, as told by Pastor Muriel.
Radagon once cleansed himself with celestial dew, repented his territorial aggressions, and swore his love to Rennala. The Order of the Erdtree and the fate of the moon were conjoined, and all the wounds of war forgiven.
The union wasn't without its curiosities, however. When first entering their marriage, Radagon brought with him golden tailoring tools. Their description states, tailoring tools made from gold. Tools brought with the red-haired Radagon when he married into the Carian line. With these tools, specifically his golden sewing needle, Radagon would sew the mouths shut of those closest to him and his wife, Queen Rennala. The Mask of Confidence is a mask with the mouth sewn shut with gold thread. When Radagon married Rennala, he ordered the Carian magic preceptors to don these masks, to make it clear that all of their matters were to be kept strictly private.
You know, that's not something I would have thought, that Radagon personally sewed the mouths shut of the preceptors, but I can definitely see where she's coming from with that. I like it.
Radagon specifically silenced those around him after joining the Carian royal line. This is a bit of a strange and seemingly nefarious action that I'd like you to keep in mind. This was a time of peace, and many gifts were exchanged during this period. The Glintstone Kriss was one such gift. Its description reading, Ritual Blade.
Oh yeah, Crunchy. And so this might also be a bit of evidence for flames kind of being part of the early era of the Erdtree, because the Glintstone Kriss kind of represents fire, but it's given Erdtree adornment. Although I guess you might be able to argue, like, with the fire being subsumed into the Erdtree imagery here, maybe it was also kind of vanquished.
Was one such gift. Its description reading, Ritual Blade once presented to Leyndell by the Academy of Raya Lucaria to celebrate their newfound peace. Radagon and Rennala would go on to have 3 children together, Radon, Rykard, and Ranni. Lord Radagon did not seem particularly close with any of his children, except for Radon, who, however, was more infantilized by the Lord of the Battlefield, First Elden Lord Godfrey. Radon's armor reads, the golden lion is said to symbolize Godfrey, the Elden Lord, and his beast regent, Surash. From his youngest years, Radon was naturally captivated by the Lord of the Battlefield. Radon was also very proud of the red hair he inherited from his father, something Radagon personally despised.
And right, though that description with Radon kind of being captivated with Godfrey could imply a kind of personal connection between the two, which is a little bit surprising, but should also potentially indicate that Radagon and Godfrey were contemporaries to some degree. Maybe not in terms of like age, but you know, they still exist within the same time frame to some degree. Crunchy leans toward the Giant War, Liurnian Wars. It's just curious why Godfrey isn't involved over the course of 2 major wars. Yeah, I 1000% agree with that, especially with the one sword sword monument saying that like Godfrey's armies were unvanquished and unbowed, but then he like the color of his eyes faded. And since we're also told that that Godfrey was robbed of his grace, I think this does call into question the veracity of all of the sword monuments, to be honest. Yeah, Radon certainly admired his father, but he stand Godfrey more. True story.
Radon inherited the furious flaming red hair of his father Radagon, and is fond of its heroic implications. So it says in the description of Radon's red mane helm. The giant's red braid gives us some explanation as to Radagon's adverse reaction. Every giant is red of hair, and Radagon was said to have despised his own red locks. Perhaps that was a curse of their kind. This is evidence enough for a lot of people that Radagon himself is at least part giant. Although I'm not entirely convinced on the subject, I won't write it off completely, so let's keep this in mind.
And right, we already talked about that earlier in the video. I figured she'd probably bring it up, so I was trying to like hold off, but oh well.
In lieu of spending much time with his 3 children, Radagon instead focused primarily on learning sorcery. Radagon's icon tells us, as the husband of Renala of Caria, the red-haired Radagon studied sorcery. What I found odd was the absence of Radagon being mentioned in any spell's descriptions. The only connection I could find that links him to the Academy of Raya Lucaria is the Red Wolf of Radagon, an early game boss found right before Queen Renala. So what exactly was Radagon studying?
There's also the big-ass statue of Radagon behind Renala in her boss arena room, her private library. His talisman as well as in the academy. Interesting, yeah. I don't exactly remember where all the talismans and stuff get dropped, but thanks for mentioning that.
Another interesting aspect involves that of the Cuckoo soldiers and knights. The Cuckoo are the soldiers and knights of Raya Lucaria, or at least that is what we are told. A spell known as the Scholar's Shield states, one of the glintstone sorceries of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, taught to the Knights of the Cuckoo by the Academy as payment for their contract. This makes it sound as if the Cuckoo were paid swordsmen of the Academy, not a loyal army. Another hint at this is the description of the Cuckoo Knight's armor, which says, armor worn by Raya Lucaria Academy Knights. Its left breast is emblazoned with a peering cuckoo, whence came their name. Perhaps the bird's shrewd gaze is an expression of their refusal to be mere servants of the Academy. There isn't any mention of the Cuckoo during the First and Second Liurnian Wars, at least none that I have found. This makes me wonder if they were formed after the peaceful end of the Second War, and therefore after the marriage of Radagon and Lady Renala. There is a theory floating around the internet regarding Radagon being a cuckoo symbolically, and that he might have been the one to form and or truly command the Cuckoo, not the Academy. This is just a theory, but yet another interesting thing to keep in mind.
So yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider because the Cuckoo Knight armor is essentially just a reskinning of all Leyndell style armor, like, you know, maybe not like Leyndell specifically, but Marika Order armor, or whatever you want to call it. I can see a bit of a justification to say that they could have been mercenaries or people who followed the retinue of Radagon and who would later become part of the Academy. But even with that being said, we are told that they're like merchants, and whether or not you want to consider the Cuckoo Knights as being the Karian Knights, we are told that Renala kind of established the Knights of Raya Lucaria, and that might include the Cuckoo, but I don't really know. Yeah, so Crunchy was just saying what I was saying with the armor styles. Stella says, it's kind of like reverse Odin when Odin disguised himself as a woman to learn magic, but Radagon being Marika would mean she would have learned through him, depending on how much they share mentally. Yes. Alright, going back to the video.
By the end of Godfrey's long campaign, instead of being rewarded for his multiple victories, he and his warriors had grace stripped away from them. This is when they officially became tarnished. The sword monument reads, Lord Godfrey, at last at the end of his campaign, his golden armies unvanquished and unbowed, yet finds grace, lost, tattered, and faded. Queen Marika is the one personally responsible for this, as Melina tells us,
Words of Queen Marika, who vanished long ago. If you wish, I will share them with you. Very well. In Marika's own words, my lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die.
After this moment, the long march begins. This is described in the Remembrance of Horalu. When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was robbed of his grace, becoming tarnished, he took with him his kinfolk and left the lands between. This would be the catalyst for our next major event, Radagon leaving Lady Renala and marrying Queen Marika. Pastor Muriel explains this.
When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Renala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of Second Elden Lord.
There is no concrete explanation given for his decision to abandon his first wife, nor for Queen Marika to marry him in the first place. In fact, this seemed rather odd, as Pastor Muriel goes on to say,
The mystery endures to this day as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Renala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
Whatever the reason, Radagon's betrayal to Queen Renala would not only leave her utterly heartbroken, but also in a state of mental fragility. The once great and powerful leader of the Academy of Raya Lucaria and queen of the Karian family now spends her time obsessed with the only parting gift Radagon left her, the Amber Egg. Pastor Muriel tells us,
In the end, Lady Renala was left alone, cradling the Amber Egg Lord Radagon bequeathed her. Now she devotes herself to it through forbidden rite, the grim art of reincarnation.
Something important to note is that the Amber Egg actually harbors a great rune inside of it, the Great Rune of the Unborn. But this is something we'll talk about in my next video. This one event sets off a chain reaction, one of the biggest being the Academy's betrayal of the Karian royals. Radagon's abandonment of his first wife left her in despair, and the Academy took no mercy on her. The Crescent Crown's description reading, When Renala, head of both the Academy of Raya Lucaria and the Karian royal family, lost her husband Radagon, her heart went along with him. And then, those at the Academy realized that Renala was no champion after all. Queen Renala is then
Crunchy says, just to clarify something, it never says the Amber Egg was a parting gift. He could have given it to her at any point. I think there might have been something that implied that it was a parting gift, but you're correct. And we're also never actually told when she received the egg, other than it coming from Radagon. And with that information coming from Muriel, and Muriel being, kind of self-admittedly not actually a subject matter expert, I do wonder whether there is some extra stuff that we don't know about the Amber Egg and its origins, especially if it's supposed to have a fragment of the Great Rune that came out of the Elden Ring after the Shattering. So, yeah, there's just so much weird stuff going on with the Amber Egg. It's just kind of enough to make your head spin. Let me type in parting gift real quick. Maybe just gift. Yeah, I guess it doesn't say that it was a parting gift. Maybe, let me double check the Japanese here real quick. No, it doesn't really say. Okay. I think people just assume that because Muriel says in the end, Lady Renala was left alone cradling the amber egg. So in a certain sense, cradling the amber egg that Lord Radagon bequeathed her. So I think they just kind of conflate those two events together, but it isn't technically explicit like you say. It could even be post-shattering as far as we know. Yeah, I don't know about post-shattering just because that makes my head ache even more, but yeah. Yo, Future Warrior, I mentioned my reply to you in the chat like twice now. Alright, going back to the video.
Captured and subsequently locked inside of the Grand Library at the Academy of Raya Lucaria.
Great and beautiful full moon witch. Sadly, her heart was broken when Lord Radagon left her. And then, when the Academy rebelled against the royals, she was locked away in the Grand Library.
Pastor Muriel is not the only one to describe these events. The Cuckoo Great Shield's description states, metal great shield painted with appearing cuckoo, carried by the enchanted knights sworn to the Academy. Our enemy is none other than Karian itself. This would lead to civil war in Liurnia. Master Iji, who sits at the base of the road to Karian Manor, gives us incredible insight on what took place there.
This territory once belonged to the Carian royal family. Their manor lies not far beyond this point. When the Raya Lucaria Academy turned on the Carians, the Knights of the Cuckoo descended on this tract. After leveling it, they carried on to the manor. The Carians were taken off guard, but their strength had not waned, and they repelled the Knights' onslaught by conjuring an enchanted snare that remains potent to this day. That is why I say, Tarnished, don't go near the manor unless you wish to lie with the corpses of the heedless Knights of the Cuckoo.
Evidently, the Academy's betrayal against the Carians would not come as a surprise as Master Iji seemed to have thought, as described by the spell Carian Retaliation, one of the sorceries of the Carian royal family. This was the Carian royal family's secret means to prepare against the disloyalty of the Academy. The moon and the stars would one day go their separate ways. Another piece of evidence that seems to point at the Carian suspicions is the Carian Knight's shield, which states, carried by knights who serve the Carian royal family, excels when facing magic or holy attacks. Just who were these knights preparing to fight? The shield's heightened defense against spell damage would prove useful against other sorcerers, but the holy damage is curious. Those who predominantly use holy damage are usually those aligned with the Golden Order.
Right, and so to answer that question a bit literally here, in the fact that we have the Cuckoos referencing Albinorix and the Albinorc bloodclot and calling them like the most vile of all or whatnot in that description, and Albinorix being said that like their like most hated enemy were like none other than the sorcerers, I do think there is a strong indication of the Cuckoos coming into contact with Albinorix, who can summon spells with their innate arcaneness. So that could be one reason for why their armor is good against magic. And if they were affiliated with the House of Karian during the war, the Liurnian Wars, that could also be why they're good against holy stuff.
Like Radagon himself. Very curious indeed. Sadly, the Carian royals would be toppled, and Liurnia would be left in ruin. While civil war waged to the south in Liurnia, Radagon returned to the royal capital of Leyndell, where he became Queen Marika's second king consort and the second Elden Lord. Malenia and Miquella are the twins born to the couple. Malenia's Great Rune's description tells us, Malenia is daughter to Queen Marika and Radagon, and her Great Rune should have been the most sacred of all. The Triple Rings of Light incantation confirms this as well, a gift from the young Miquella to his father, Radagon. So there is no question that they are both related to Queen Marika and Radagon. His children with Queen Rennala would be raised in status to demigods due to their new relationship with Queen Marika. Rykard's Great Rune description reads, Rykard was amongst the children of Rennala and Radagon, who became demigod stepchildren after Radagon's union with Queen Marika. Once he became Elden Lord, Radagon would more popularly become known as Radagon of the Golden Order. The Golden Order of the Erdtree was something of which he was passionately loyal to. The Golden Order Greatsword describes Radagon's intense faith. Greatsword made.
So a little bit of translation notes. Obviously in Radagon's boss title plate, he's called Radagon of the Golden Order, but his Japanese is kind of, what do I want to say? A little bit more provocative. So let's just show it to you guys. Radagon of. All right. So we have Radagon of the Golden Order, but in the Japanese we have Ogon Ritsu, so Golden Order, comma, Radagon. So as I've mentioned before on my previous streams, does this mean that Radagon literally embodies the Golden Order? Maybe. I don't really think that changes anything she's saying here. I just think it's fun to mention to you guys. Crunchy, could you elaborate? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Could it be like the way you address a letter in Japanese, where you would like say the institution first and then the person? I don't necessarily think so. And as I've said before, I think this is kind of similar to the way that like Loretta is called. So Ogonritsu Radagon is like, Radagon is his own thing, and so is Ogonritsu. They're both describing the same thing. So let's look up Loretta. All right, so Loretta, comma, Knight of the Halig Tree. So you could interpret this to mean that Knight of the Halig Tree modifies Loretta, but I think you could make the argument that these are two independent clauses here, and so that they don't necessarily inform the other. So Loretta is Loretta, and she is also the Knight of the Halig Tree. And just to give the Japanese example, we have like Holy Tree Knight Cavalryman Loretta here. So that's kind of like the equivalent of where Golden Order appears in Radagon's boss title plate. So you have Holy Tree Knight Loretta, kind of like Golden Order Radagon, if that makes sense. Okay. Why was Malenia supposed to be the most sacred of all? Because of her not being stunted by Miquella? So I think both her and Miquella were supposed to be considered the most holy of all. And I think this goes into the idea of them being Empyreans by virtue of birth, because they are supposed to be the children of a single god. So Miquella and Malenia are both the children of a single god. The Japanese here is a little bit more leading in that it says Miquella and Malenia are children of the only person god. Well, yeah. So it's like the only person god, meaning like the one individual god, the one bodied person, in my opinion. So with, oh yeah, I guess I should explain that the term Empyrean comes from Shinjin in Japanese, which literally means god person. So if an Empyrean is a god person and Miquella and Melania are the offspring of a single god person, then they are implicitly god people themselves, even though like their genetic makeup is somehow different by virtue of them like being male and female and all that, fraternal twins. So yeah, setting all that stuff aside, I think the reason they're Empyreans is because they come from the god, and they are god people. So by nature of being god people, they should be innately more divine than anything else that isn't from that god person. Yeah, sum of a whole. Okay. Conscom says, does Miquella have a rune? You honestly never thought about it? You'd assume not. So that is a very contentious topic because some people have theorized that the Great Rune of the Unborn could have been Miquella's rune because it is a kind of mirror of Melania's rune. So let me go ahead and pull up some of these icons if I can. Rune. Right, so this is the Great Rune of the Unborn. And do I not have Melania's label? Oh no, it's right here. I'm blind. And this is Melania's Great Rune. And so for reference, here is Radagon and Rykard. And so with those two being brothers and them having similar runes, some people have theorized that Melania's Great Rune should be mirrored in the Great Rune of the Unborn, and therefore it should belong to Miquella. And then one thing that I wanted to mention earlier in the video, which I don't know exactly how relevant it really is that in the 1.0 version of the game, it said that the Knights of the Halig Tree were gifts by Radagon from like the Carian Knights to Miquella. So there might have been a stronger connection between Miquella and Karian in earlier drafts. The player character's Miquella's rune? I know where you got that. You thought maybe he never got one. That's also a possibility. I'm just bringing up the rune thing because that's one thing that a lot of people believe. But if Miquella does have a rune shard, we don't ever obtain it. And Gideon doesn't even really imply that he actually had one for whatever reason. All right, going back.
Made of light, modeled after the Elden Ring itself, forged by King Consort Radagon to proudly symbolize the tenets of the Golden Order. What's interesting about this sword is not what it currently is, but what it once was. Telltale signs betray that this was once the great sword bequeathed to him by his first wife, Rennala. When completing Ranni the Witch's questline, she gives the player the Dark Moon Greatsword, which describes this old Karian tradition. A moon greatsword bestowed by a Karian queen upon her spouse to honor long-standing tradition. Radagon took the greatsword given to him by Queen Rennala and reforged it in the exact image of the Elden Ring. That's just how devout he was to the Golden Order. Radagon refocused his priorities back onto his studies, as the rest of the description for Radagon's icon tells us. As the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete. He would be successful in this pursuit and share it with his son, Miquella. The incantation, Radagon's Rings of Light, says one of the incantations of the Golden Order fundamentalists, a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father, Radagon. Miquella, however, would eventually turn his back on his father in order to pursue his own goals, separate from the Golden Order's will. And yet, the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Melania's accursed rot. I have a whole separate video on Miquella and what his goals were. You can click up on the link at the top of this video or at the end if you're interested in that topic. Then, everything would change. On a night that would be known as the Night of the Black Knives, Queen Marika's son from her first marriage, Godwyn the Golden, was murdered in a plot crafted by Princess Ranni.
Rennala and Radagon's only daughter. Ranni herself confirms this.
I stole a fragment of the Rune of Death and used it to forge the god-slaying black knives through fearsome rite. I did it all.
I won't get into the details of that plot or the consequences that followed after, but if you're curious, I have a whole video on the Prince of Death. You can check that out after this one as well. Almost immediately after this event, Queen Marika would do the unthinkable, the single most important decision that would set into motion the entire game, shattering the Elden Ring itself. Marika's hammer is the tool with which Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, but Radagon, on the other hand, attempted to repair it.
Alright, so one thing that I want to mention in relation to Radagon kind of modeling his Golden Order Great Sword after the Elden Ring is that I don't think that the Elden Ring had his like trellis pattern in it when he made the Great Sword, so I think he kind of integrated a couple things into what he eventually came up with. So give me one moment here. So with the Golden Order Greatsword, I think you could say that he modeled it on the Elden Ring with like the rune on the outside, or maybe there's supposed to be more total at some point that it got like messed up. But I don't think that the trellis, like his web of weird word or whatever you want to call it, design was integrated into the Elden Ring when he first forged this. And this kind of became the prototype of his idea for him becoming Elden Lord and turning his Great Rune into the like part of the ring. And Crunchy wonders how you reforged the Dark Moon Greatsword. Do you need a forge, a hammer, fire, or just magicness? That's a good question. I do think there might be a component of manipulating light that goes along with it, because maybe is it mentioned in this game? Let me look it up. I guess not. Maybe it's in Bloodborne where it says like or maybe Dark Souls, that the Dark Moon Great Swords are kind of like just part of the moonlight itself. So that's kind of what my thought was, but maybe that's not such an Elden Ring specific thing.
Queen Marika's actions would ripple throughout the lands between, and as punishment, she would be imprisoned inside the Erd Tree.
Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision, a god in truth. But after the Elden Ring's shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erd Tree, a grim punishment for shattering the Order, despite her godhood.
The two fingers in the round table hold weigh in on this as well.
Marika's trespass demanded a heavy sentence. But even in shackles, she remains a god and a vision's vessel.
When we finally make it into the Erd Tree, we find that both Radagon and Queen Marika were imprisoned inside. That is because Radagon is Marika. Faced with killing a god. And that brings us to the abrupt end of Radagon of the Golden Order's timeline.
There are still many questions that remain, and I'll be working on a part 2 theory video to come out very soon. I hope that this timeline proves to be helpful, and please leave any corrections, suggestions, and questions you may have in the comments down below. Thank you to the few of you who stuck it out all the way to the end of this video. I appreciate all of your continued support on my channel, and as always, I can't wait to talk to you all on the next one. Bye!
I think that was a pretty good video. I liked the observations about Radagon's gold needle with the masks of confidence, as well as the idea that the Cuckoo Knights could have been kind of brought into the fold with Radagon's armies assimilating with Renala's, because that's something I hadn't considered, surprisingly enough. But I can see a bit of sense to that, even if it is ultimately left vague. So, I thought there was something else that I wanted to mention. Yeah, if so, I just kind of lost it in the sauce there. Alright, so anyway, that was a good video. I've gone ahead and linked it into chat if you want to give her a like and a subscribe. And we do have one more video from her left on schedule for tonight, in that it will be talking about Radagon's secret sorcery, so kind of on theme for tonight. Crunchy says, Radagon is America, but it never says America is Radagon. Technically, in the Japanese, it does. The little statue, when it's revealed, it's more like, that which is Radagon is America. So, yeah. Although I'm assuming you're just kind of joking, but I can't exactly tell with text all the time. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to Radagon's Secret Sorcery by a human Justicar.
Something that stumped me during the creation of my Radagon's complete timeline video was the mentioning of Radagon learning sorceries without any actual evidence of him doing so. Radagon's icon states, as the husband of Renala of Caria, the red-haired Radagon studied sorcery, and yet not one spell mentions him. Radagon also doesn't use any spells during his boss battle, only incantations.
Yeah, and that's weird because none of the incantations he uses are anything that we can use ourselves. Although maybe he uses like some discus of lights that return back. I don't remember, but in any case, like the vast majority of his stuff is not actually incantations we use. And for a long time, I thought he used Litany of Proper Death, but like last weekend, I was going back through and I didn't actually ever see him use it. So maybe I was just misremembering.
Was this a mistake? Or is there more to Radagon's mysterious time spent in Liurnia? Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I am a human Justicar, and today we'll be discussing a few theories regarding Radagon's secret sorcery. If you haven't seen any of my Radagon videos recently, I'd highly recommend checking those out first before watching this one, because I will be referring to them a lot today. Also, if you aren't subscribed to my channel yet but enjoy my videos, you should do so by clicking subscribe down below. There will be major spoilers ahead, so please continue at your own risk. Since he was the husband of Queen Renala, who was the head of Raya Lucaria Academy, I always assumed that Radagon studied in the academy. However, nowhere does it claim that Radagon learned sorcery at Raya Lucaria. There are no pictures of him hanging on the walls, and the only statue of him is found in the Grand Library with Lady Renala. Since looking it over, it definitely seems more likely that Radagon would have studied at the Karian study hall. The mask.
I'm curious why she would say that. Oh, probably because of Miriam. And I was going to say that the Karian study hall, I think, has the exact same issues as Raya Lucaria does, with the exception of like the preceptor there. But okay, let's see where she goes with this.
Mask of confidence is a mask with the mouth sewn shut with golden thread. When Radagon married Renala, he ordered the Karian magic preceptors to don these masks, to make it clear that all of their matters were to be kept strictly private. A preceptor is an instructor. Their robes tell us that they were the magic preceptors who served the Karian royals. There still is a preceptor that lurks in the now abandoned Karian study hall, Preceptor Miriam, who drops several Karian sorceries when defeated. We can assume that once upon a time, this study hall was full of preceptors and their royal pupils. These royal instructors may have been the ones to teach Radagon sorcery, and if this is the case, that would actually explain why there isn't much information about it, since the magic preceptors were sworn to secrecy. So, what kind of sorcery did Radagon study that he so desperately wanted to keep a secret?
Well, I do like this theory. I do feel as though it might overlook that you could make the same assumptions about Caria Manor, because you do have Celavus there. Whether or not you want to believe like he's a real preceptor is kind of a bit of a different topic, though. But at the very least, there could be multiple places he learned sorcery, I guess.
In Elden Ring, there are 13 types of sorcery that exist. That means there's 13 possible answers, which makes finding the right one a challenge. The simplest way of finding our potential answer is by process of elimination. For the sake of this video, we will be continuing under the assumption that he only learned one. This list does not include incantations of any kind. These are all sorceries with spells that can be found, learned, and cast in the game. First are the Glintstone sorceries of the Raya Lucaria Academy and the Karian sorceries of the Karian royal family. These two would be the most obvious options, seeing as how it was Karian magic preceptors who would have been Radagon's teachers in the first place. And Radagon, by marrying Queen Rennala, was a vital member of the Karian royal family. There's also the connection between Radagon and the Red Wolf of Radagon, an enemy boss found in Raya Lucaria. It uses variations of both Karian and Glintstone spells to attack the player, so this could be a hint at Radagon learning those sorceries. Glintstone and Karian sorceries are the two most common and well-known sorceries throughout the lands between. So why all of the secrecy? It was a marriage between Radagon and Rennala that brought an end to the two warring nations. The full moon crossbow was made to celebrate the matrimonial union and reconciliation between the houses of the Erdtree and the full moon, Leyndell and Raya Lucaria. This kind of contradicts the idea of Radagon wanting to keep his time and studies in Liurnia a secret. Additionally, just because the Red Wolf of Radagon uses Glintstone and Karian sorceries doesn't necessarily mean Radagon did as well. There also isn't any evidence.
That one, I feel like that she's not exactly wrong, but I feel like that would overlook the question of why the Red Wolves would have those sorceries then. So I think it does become a bit of a natural assumption to believe that Radagon may have learned a little bit of sorceries for the Red Wolves to have their own kind of sorceries, but technically we don't actually know the truth about that, and the Radagon Wolf swords could just be their own thing, I guess. But if so, that doesn't really seem that intuitive, because we do have a Red Wolf of Radagon within the Academy, but we also have a couple of Red Wolves in the outskirts of Caria Manor, one in the Consecrated Snowfield, which I think also uses the swords, but maybe I'll need to go back and double check to see if they all use those little swords or not. I'm pretty sure they do. And then Nectarine, welcome back to the stream. You said, is Loretta's bow not a variant of Karian sword spells? I don't remember, but I don't think it uses a sigil, and that might differentiate them. Or maybe there's a bit of bonuses provided from equipment which would classify it as something else. Okay, going back.
Evidence that Radagon ever used either of these sorceries during or after his time in Liurnia. While I don't think that these are the sorceries Radagon would have studied in secret, it's still entirely possible. The next type of sorcery is the night sorceries of Celia.
Right. And so I did want to mention when she said like Radagon learned sorceries in secret, I think that's a bit of an assumption, and I believe the reason Radagon may have wanted secrecy was so that the preceptors couldn't talk about the proverbial skeleton in his closet of Radagon being America. And I have wondered whether or not Renala knew at some point, which I mean, it would seem very natural because the children don't seem to be particularly scarred with everything that happened. Well, relatively speaking, not scarred about that at least, you know. So anyway, going back to the video.
Sicilians were assassins that utilized every option that aided their dirty work, and it is said that they often hunted their fellows. Their sorceries were also heavily influenced by the Eternal City, such as Night Maiden's Mist and Eternal Darkness. It could be possible that Radagon wished to learn the night sorceries, or even perhaps the sorceries of the treacherous Eternal City. This would explain the need for secrecy since they are described as forbidden sorcery. Other than that, though, I don't see any other evidence of Radagon ever learning Sicilian sorceries or what he would have used them for, so I'm not convinced. Next up are the two sorceries of Radagon's sons, Magma of Praetor Rykard and Gravity of General Radon. The spell Rolling Magma tells us, after discovering the ancient hexes of Gelmir, Rykard, son of Queen Renala, brought them back into practical use as new forms of sorcery. Magma sorceries were developed from the magma of Mount Gelmir, and as far as we know, Radagon never set foot on Mount Gelmir. If Rykard is the one to discover these ancient hexes and bring them back as sorcery, then it wouldn't line up with our timeline.
Exactly.
Now, gravity sorcery is a little trickier. It's said to originate from the Onyx Lords, and General Radon learned from his master, an alabaster lord with skin of stone. Coincidentally, there is an Onyx Lord locked inside the royal grave Everjail, located behind the Karian Manor. If Radagon had studied gravity magic like his son Radon, perhaps this was the Onyx Lord that taught him. We know that Nokron was banished underground by gravity magic, as explained by the spell Meteorite of Estelle, a manifestation of the power with which Estelle leveled the Eternal City. I believe that something similar happened to both Nokstella and the unnamed Eternal City under Lyondell. Could Elden Lord Radagon have studied gravitational magic with the intent to do the same to Academy Gate Town?
The claim that the Nox were banished due to gravity magic is technically unsubstantiated, although it is very commonly believed, and there is the potential that they got demolished by the Greater Will first, and then once they were underground, they were further demolished by inadvertently summoning in Estelle through their despair, but I'll just leave that there for now.
The Mask of Confidence could have prevented the magic preceptors from warning Renala, as the head of Raya Lucaria, and other officials in Academy Gate Town of Radagon's destructive plan. This is one of my favorite theories because it goes in line with the theory from my first Radagon video that his marriage to Queen Renala was a lot more nefarious than it's presented to us. There is a major flaw in this theory, and that is General Radon's tutelage with the Alabaster Lord in Caelid. The Remembrance of the Star Scourge tells us, the Red Lion General wielded gravitational powers which he learned in Celia during his younger days. If the
So I'm definitely going to respect her recognizing flaws in her own opinions here, or arguments, because that is, I think, a sign of somebody who is definitely introspective about their claims and is a sign of good things overall.
Magic preceptors and his own father were studying gravitational magic in Liurnia, why would he have to travel so far away? As fun as this theory can be, it does not add up. But never fear, there are still 8 more sorceries to consider, so let's keep going. Loretta's sorceries were developed by Loretta after her long, bloody journey to seek out a place where the Albinaurics could live in peace. So this is an obvious no. Even despite her previously being a Karian royal guard, it just doesn't make sense in our timeline. The same goes for Death, Bubble, Full Moon, and Crystallian sorceries. While all could potentially be the right one, There just isn't enough evidence to connect them to Radagon. Primeval sorceries are another interesting type of sorcery to consider. 2 of the Academy's founding Glintstone sorcerers, Master Lusat and Azur, were also primeval current sorcerers. They and their pupil sorceress Selene were seemingly banished from the Academy once Queen Renala became the head of the school. Selene tells us,
If you recall, I was exiled from the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. It was for attempting to restore the primeval current of Glintstone sorcery. The toothless pedantry peddled by the Carian royal family can rot for all I care. I want...
Yeah, and as Crunchy says, Renala does use Comet Azure, which I think is really funny. You also have a pseudo Comet Azure that gets summoned with the Carian Sword of Night and Flame, so... I know Sinister Stromboli has also thought that the eye laser utilized by the Gashadokuro style gigantic skeletons in the mountaintops and in the Mogun... Actually, do the Mogun Dynasty ones use it? I think they do. Anyway, the giant skeletons, those who live in death, are summoned by the Tibia Mariners. They also have like this eye laser beam, which is, black and white. But generally speaking, it is similar to Comet Azure as well. So, oh yeah, another like constructive criticism thing for human Justicar is that balance the sound a little bit better for like the NPCs, because Selene is insanely quiet compared to your voice. There's something like that going on in the last video. I think it was with Muriel maybe. And obviously, if you have the time to go back through when you're gathering footage, it would probably be better for lore purposes to mute the sound effects as well as the background music. So that way, when you add your own background music, it isn't like conflicting with what you've got going on here. Okay.
Want glintstone sorceries that open our minds, unbound by terrestrial taboos, no matter what we give in return.
So it's obvious that primeval sorceries were taboo to the Carians. This could be why Radagon had the preceptors don the mask of confidence. But why would he want to study the primeval current sorceries? Something I discussed in my latest video is the fact that the Elden Beast is a fallen star, as the Elden Stars tell us. The Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between. And the eldest of the primeval sorceries just so happens to be the founding reign of stars, said to have been discovered by an ancient astrologer. The glimpse of the primeval current that the astrologer saw became real, and the star's amber rained down on this land. We know from Sorceress Selene that the star's amber is glintstone, but what if this glimpse of the primeval current carried with it not just glintstone, but also a golden star? As we've seen with the 2 fingers in the round table hold, communicating with the Greater Will isn't as simple as it seems, and can take a very long time. Could Radagon have been trying to open the primeval current to reach the Greater Will? I don't want to count this one out, but as some viewers have pointed out in my last video, the 2 events might not have been connected at all. If that's the case, then it kind of throws the whole theory out the window. So let's take a look at our last 2 sorceries.
I think there's kind of room for a bit of both. I don't necessarily think it needed to have been like the first version of Founding Reign of Stars, but yeah, there could have been more to it, and I'm sure she'll go into like where... I'll just leave it alone for now, because she has more to say. He was just trying to get the legendary sorcery achievement. Got us.
Cold or ice sorceries and aberrant sorceries. Cold and ice sorceries originate from 2 mysterious sources, the Knights of Zamor in the mountaintops of the Giants, and the Old Snow Witch. The spell Freezing Mist explains that the snowy crone taught the young Ranni to fear the dark moon as she imparted her cold sorcery. We know that this cold sorcery was considered heretical after obtaining the Snow Witch hat. It also tells us that the Old Witch was Ranni's secret mentor. Like father, like daughter, Ranni the Witch too studied sorcery in secret. Having said that, I don't see much connection between the Old Crone and Radagon in particular. So let's switch focus on the Zamor ice magic.
Well, maybe that's because she didn't put her Nox tinfoil hat on and realized the snow crone is Renala. No, but in all seriousness, that might be a possibility that the snow crone could have been Renala. But with that being said, Ronnie's doll doesn't exactly look very much like Renala either. Not just in the fact that the faces look different, but Renala doesn't seem to have 4 arms either. But who really knows how important that is?
The Knights of Zamor are long-lived warriors, clad in biting, freezing winds, and are said to have been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. Zamor is not a race. By the way it is described, it sounds more like a place or a civilization.
And I should probably remember Zamorians as being more humanoid, like actual concrete evidence of like humanoids being present along with Godfrey before like the war against the giants. But I tend to forget about them because they're pretty limited in where they show up, surprisingly. Probably one of the least reused enemies in the game, which I'm pretty thankful for because they're pretty damn beefy and hit really hard too.
Similar to how Loretta is a knight of the Halig tree, or Moongrum is a Karian knight. The spell Zamor Ice Storm is the only known ice sorcery spell. It describes them as cloaked in icy tempests. The Knights of Zamor have challenged the fire giants since ancient times. The connection they have to Radagon is the lone knight imprisoned in the Weeping Everjail. Upon defeat, this single Knight of Zamor, so far away from home, drops Radagon's scar seal, an eye engraved with an Elden rune, said to be the seal of King Consort Radagon. These seals represent the lifelong duty of those chosen by the gods. Although this proves some sort of connection between this Knight of Zamor and Radagon, it doesn't prove that Radagon was secretly studying ice sorcery. Finally, we've arrived at the last.
So Nectarine says the Zamor guys have frenzy eyes, which is just a lore mess. They have frenzy eyes? I didn't know that. Sinclair asks, how much of the 4-armed thing is her superimposed over the doll? Well, the 4 arms that Ronnie has is the puppet. Like, she folds, like, 2 of her hands together and she still has, like, 4 hands. They aren't, like, spiritual hands. There's a Zully video? Okay. I'll need to, like, look into it. Okay, thank you.
Sorcery type. Aberrant sorcery. Briars of Sin and Briars of Punishment are the only 2 known spells. These abnormal sorceries, which technically are called thorn sorceries, do not scale with intelligence, but rather with faith. The Staff of the Guilty explains, sorceries are scaled with faith rather than intelligence when wielding this staff, which enhances thorn sorceries in particular. It also says that these sorceries are similar to hex magic. A hex means to either bewitch or place a curse on someone or something. The staff itself is fashioned from a smoldering withered sapling that turns the blood of sacrifices pierced by it into glintstone. Red glintstone, to be precise. These types of sorceries are despised by the Academy, as the Briars of Punishment's description states. An aberrant sorcery discovered by exiled criminals. Theirs are the sorceries most reviled by the Academy. There are also multiple roaming groups of thorn sorcerers and fire monks in Liurnia Lakes. One such group just so happens to have a camp set up just north of the Karian Study Hall. These exiled criminals are also known as the Guilty, a group I brought up in my latest video. The Guilty hood is the garb of those accused of lesser crimes, indicated by the collar of sharpened branches. The individuals we discussed are the ones found crucified in Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula, but we know that the practice is much more ancient due to the presence of Guilty found in Farum Azula, identifiable by the collar of sharpened branches hanging around their neck. These particular Guilty, however, found faith in their suffering. They now wear their collar of thorns as a crown around their heads. The Briars of Punishment tell us, the Guilty, their eyes gouged by thorns, lived in eternal darkness. There they discovered the Blood Star. The fire monks and prelates are strongly connected to the thorn sorcerers, always seen traveling together in groups. The thorned whip, dropped by fire prelates, is a hefty whip covered in crimson thorns, a device of fearsome religious encouragement. It is fashioned in the image of the briars of sin. Let's talk about the connections between thorn sorceries and Radagon of the Golden Order. Starting with the first one, the impenetrable thorns that block the entrance to the Erd Tree. Impenetrable thorns refuse all. None may enter the Erd Tree. Melina speaks to us about them.
You are unable to enter the Erd Tree. No? Prevented by the mantle of barbs. The thorns are impenetrable. A husk of the Erd Tree's being that spurns all that exists without. The only way to stand before the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord is to pass the thorns.
The thorns wrapped tightly against the entrance to the Erd Tree are accompanied by Radagon's signature crosshatch rune, glimmering in gold, signifying, to me at least, that he had something to do with their presence. But why thorns? Thorns symbolize sin, as well as pain and sorrow. Queen Marika's shattering of the Elden Ring was considered a sin, a grave trespass against the Greater Will and the Golden Order. For the guilty, thorns were a part of their punishment, symbolizing their sins, their transgressions. It's hard to believe that it's a simple coincidence that a mantle of thorns just so happens to be the one thing preventing the player from entering the Erd Tree. But thorn sorceries create violent red thorns from blood sacrifices. How could these possibly be the same kind of magic? Well, a unique thing about thorn sorceries is that when they are performed, the spell requires a self-inflicted blood sacrifice, wounds the caster with thorns of punishment. That would mean Radagon wounded himself when casting from inside the Erd Tree, and I believe that's exactly what happened. The long, blood-red object jutting out of Queen Marika's torso might just be the result of the blood sacrifice needed to create the impenetrable thorns. We know that Marika and Radagon, despite sharing the same body at this time, were at odds with one another. Marika's hammer is the tool with which Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, and Radagon attempted to repair it. Radagon was in complete opposition to Queen Marika's actions, and instead wished to make things right again. He may have created the thorns to prevent others from trying to free himself and Queen Marika as a part of her punishment. Punishment is exactly what Queen Marika received after shattering the Elden Ring. As Enya tells us, after the Elden Ring shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erd Tree. The Elden Beast was also partially responsible for this. It performs an attack called Divine Punishment that mimics the crucifixion of Marika, but you'll notice that it pierces the player with golden stars, not a singular red one.
I didn't realize it actually had a name, this attack. So yeah, I disagree with a lot of what she's saying here, and I'll go into that more, but I wanted her to kind of finish her point.
The Elden Beast restricted Queen Marika's movements by crucifying her, and Radagon imprisoned her inside the Erd Tree with the mantle of barbs, giving him a chance to try and fix the Elden Ring. The second connection is that of Renala's bewitchment. This is my own theory that we discussed in my last two Radagon videos, Radagon's complete timeline and the Great Rune of the Unborn. Renala has completely forgotten who she is, or should I say, who she once was. Now she spends every moment cradling the amber egg gifted to her by her husband, Radagon. I theorize that the amber egg was bewitched, and has Renala completely trapped under its spell. If you remember earlier, I mentioned how thorn sorcery is considered in the game similar to hex magic. A hex is to bewitch someone or something. Now, the only two spells we've...
Alright, so that is kind of coming from maybe an English, Anglo-centric perspective there, in that a hex doesn't necessarily mean to bewitch something in a FromSoft game, and a hex is more specifically related to curse-style magic, where the spirits of the dead linger on in the world and assail any nearby targets. Those are like specific for FromSoft games, whereas like bewitching magic tends to be a bit different and can show up in a couple different ways in terms of the like bewitching branches obviously is one thing, but often in FromSoft games, fire is bewitching because of its nature as like a flame and being warm, and moths being attracted to flame. That kind of imagery goes along with that. And then other forms of bewitchment can come along with light. So we have like the glintstone fireflies, or just like the gold and silver fireflies having a bewitching or an alluring light. And there's also the stuff like rapport that was in Dark Souls.
Find have nothing to do with bewitchment, which possibly debunks my entire argument. But there also isn't any official Thorn Sorceries
All right, let me back that up so she has her full thought there.
magic. A hex is to bewitch someone or something. Now, the only two spells we find have nothing to do with bewitchment, which possibly debunks my entire argument. But there also isn't any official Thorn Sorcery scroll found in the game, so we may never know for sure what other type of hex magic Thorn Sorceries can perform. Having said
So Thorn Sorceries don't necessarily perform hex magic. They're just kind of similar in that I guess they like kind of sacrifice and require pain to operate, I guess, but that's kind of like its own topic of discussion, really.
said that there is one who we know for sure practiced bewitchment in the lands between, and that is Radagon's Empyrean son, Miquella, the Unalloyed. The bewitchment branch works by piercing a foe to turn them into a temporary ally, and it is crafted with a bud cultivated from youthful sacramental blood. The end is sharpened to resemble a needle, or perhaps the sharp end of a thorn. Miquella actively used blood magic, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Miquella's use of blood magic draws a connection back to Thorn Sorceries. The Staff of the Guilty is made from a smoldering, withered sapling that only works when using the blood of sacrifices. The Bewitching Branch is crafted from a sacramental bud, an item that shares similarities with the crystal bud and the rimmed crystal bud. Both of these state that they're a young plant, prevented from maturing, otherwise known as a sapling. Who better to teach Miquella about this type of magic than his own father? We know that they shared magic with one another, such as Radagon's Rings of Light and the Triple Rings of Light incantations. It could be that either Radagon taught Miquella or Miquella discovered his father's secret sorcery. There are also ancient signs of a connection. The red thorn round shield is a small wooden round shield. Its emblem is an ancient red thorn design. This design eerily resembles Radagon's rune. It also depicts two sides becoming conjoined and connecting to 8 posts. Queen Marika and Radagon have 8 confirmed children: Godwyn, Mohg, Morgott, Radon, Rykard, Ranni, Malenia, and Miquella, and they are each 2 sides conjoined into one. There are many other smaller aspects surrounding Radagon.
Yeah, I think that kind of connection is a little bit of a stretch for me, especially when we're told of there potentially being other Karian princesses that we don't really know about, as well as the things about the Wandering Mausoleum. And actually, I think that kind of might double dip by saying that Godfrey and his children are also Radagon's children, which, you know, is kind of true because Radagon is Marika and vice versa, but we don't necessarily say like Morgott is Radagon's child with all that other stuff. Willful traitors all. There can be only one with the Highlander. Right. Elden Enthusiast wonders if Miquella's blood magic drew the attention of the formless mother, leading to his downfall. Maybe. I hadn't considered it from that angle.
That connect back to Thorn Sorcery, such as Thorn Sorcery skill with faith rather than intelligence, The branches that appear at the base of his statues slightly resemble the briars of sin. The connection between both Radagon and the Thorn Sorcerers to the Fire Giants and the Fell God. There's just one problem: the Blood Star, which is a topic for another video. So I'll pass this question off to you. Which sorcery do you think Radagon learned in secret, and why? Thank you so much.
All right, so there's a lot to talk about here. So I think the first mistake is trying to say that Radagon needed to learn Thorn Sorcery from Rennala. That doesn't really track to me for a variety of reasons. First and foremost being Raya Lucarian's loathing of the Thorn Sorceries to begin with. So if he needed to learn sorcery and he was bewitched by Rennala, but we don't ever see Rennala use Thorn Sorcery, why would he naturally bring up like learning Thorn Sorceries from her when he could have essentially just gone to the mountaintops or something else instead? That doesn't really make much sense to me at all. And I think she is trying to shoehorn in the idea of the Fire Monk encampment near the Karian study hall to kind of fit this agenda of the connection between them, when I just think it's more of a coincidence than anything else. And so, setting that aside a little bit, I don't think that really fully resolves the idea of Radagon not necessarily needing blood sorceries for the like Thorns of Rejection on the Erd Tree itself. She does mention like the Spear of Longinus type thing could be blood, but I think that's also like a really big stretch. It seems way more likely to me it's a fragment of Destined Death, but you know, that's arguable, so I'll leave that bit alone for now. It doesn't say Radagon studied sorcery with Rennala just as her husband. That's kind of fair, and it is unfortunate that we don't actually see what sorcery he studies. But to be fair, I feel as though this might overlook the Raya Lucarian barrier kind of being almost a one-to-one shared visual theme as Radagon's Elden Rune. So let me pull that stuff up. So we've got the whole Raya Lucaria barrier thing here, and obviously this is, you know, pretty contained in its own form here. Elden Rune. But when we look at Radagon's Elden Rune attack, or like the Thorns of Rejection, there's a kind of similar motif going on with the cross-hatched, latticed pattern between them. And I think this idea got incorporated into his Elden Rune later on. So, if Radagon did learn sorceries, I think it's most likely he learned sorceries from Rennala because she's the one who bewitched him, essentially. And I think it's a little bit of a disservice to imply that the sorceries that he needed could have come from anybody other than Rennala, to be honest. And part of the reason for that is we're told that the moon has the power to control the stars, and therefore it has the power to control fate, essentially. And I think if you want to take that idea of fate being intrinsic to the Carians, it's also important to consider that if Radagon is supposed to embody the Golden Order, and the Golden Order essentially fetters both Carian astrology, but also destined death when it gets removed from the Elden Ring upon its inception, I do think there is enough reason to suggest that Radagon may have studied lunar magic to keep the fate in the night skies at bay, so that way the Golden Order could govern the night skies as well. But again, a lot of that stuff is also arguable because even if the Golden Order does fetter the night skies, we do have Ranni regaining her fate in the night skies once we kill Radahn, so that is always a pain in the ass to talk about there. Now, what else did I have to say about sorceries and Radagon? Lunar magic. So, yeah, I don't necessarily know how I feel about this, but to go back to the idea of the moon and destined death, we are told that the moon has the power to keep destined death at bay in a roundabout way in the Eclipse Sun Great Shield, where it says that the eclipsed sun keeps destined death at bay. So what is an eclipsed sun? One that is eclipsed by the moon. So could Radagon have used the powers of the moon in conjunction with other stuff to help Marika seal the rune of death into Malekith? And does that also affect the sun? Maybe. I have wondered whether or not the Golden Order seal here is supposed to show a moon up here or a sun, but I mean, that's just also super heavy speculation on my part. Maybe the Golden Order fundamentalist stuff is sort of half sorcery since it scales with intelligence and faith. Like you use astrology to better understand the order and affirm your faith. Yes, so that is kind of what my thoughts on that are. And so with Radagon needing to study a faith-based sorcery, I like the idea, but I do think that also overlooks what Nectarine was just bringing up there, in that once Radagon turns to Golden Order fundamentalism, you do have a sudden introduction of intelligence into the fold of incantations, and I think that should imply that he was studying with his int stat to bring that kind of knowledge into the study of incantations to kind of further their grace, as Marika says. On the topic of fate, golden amber is believed to alter the fate of the gods, and Selvis's potions are a can of worms on their own for you. Yeah, I don't necessarily know if the amber starlight truly does govern the fate of the demigods, because Selvis's motions do... Selvis's plans do fall through, so... Right, I don't entirely know what to make of that. So... Did Radagon learn in the Karian study hall? I think it's arguable. He may have taken some lessons there. Could he have learned a little bit in Raya Lucaria? Possibly. We do have the Red Wolf of Radagon there, so it does show potentially that he was there for a little bit, as well as a statue. And or could he have learned in Caria Manor? I think so. So maybe he learned in all three locations. I don't think we really need to limit it to one. But I do think his relationship with Rennala is kind of unquestionable, to be honest. Elden Enthusiast asks, is it because Ranni is Karian while Mikola and Melania are Marika's kids? Could you elaborate on that? Because I'm not sure with what you're asking about it. Oh, are you talking about the fate of the demigods? Okay, I could see that. Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, because Ranni is still technically a demigod, just like Mikola and Melania. She's an Empyrean, so maybe the Golden Starlight doesn't work on Empyreans? I don't know, because at least Gowry does imply that Empyreans are demigods, because he does say an Empyrean is no mere demigod, so we don't know if it's a case of squares and rectangles and whether or not they're different. So let's go ahead and finish out the rest of this video.
Much for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Please leave any corrections, suggestions, and questions you may have down in those comments as well. I always try to be active in the comment section as much as I can, so make sure to, at the very least, say hi. Another huge thank you to everyone who supports my channel, whether you donated or shared my new shorts or even just liked this video. I appreciate it so, so much. As always, I can't wait to talk to you all in the next one. Bye!
Alright, so I think that was another interesting video. Obviously, I have my disagreements, but there's nothing wrong with that. This has given us more food for thought, which I can appreciate. And it's not like listed as being like incontrovertible fact. So I'm much more willing to engage with these kind of what I would consider to be like more of a thought experiment than anything else. So here we go. I have linked her video into chat if you want to give her a like and a sub like she's been asking for, and or one of those nice friendly comments. So Elden Enthusiast says, your simplified thoughts right now is Ranni equals Karian blood and the twins have no relation to Rennala. That's kind of weird to talk about, because if Ranni is half Radagon, wouldn't that necessarily imply, well, I guess if you want to say like Karian, I can see where you're coming from with that, but I don't really think it matters too much, to be honest. All right. Okay, everyone, that'll pretty much be it for me on the stream for tonight. If you guys have some more questions or comments, feel free to leave those in my comments and stuff below, or join the Discord, which is linked to the top of the chat box, or even in the main body of the video description. And we will be going live again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't know what we want to watch yet, so I'll try to figure that out, obviously, and prepare the lives for tomorrow. And if you guys do have more videos you want me to react to, be sure to let me know either in the video comments or on the Discord, because they do get kind of eaten by the chat. So once again, thank you all for stopping in the stream, whether or not you've just been lurking or actively participating in the chat. I appreciate both. Hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Last Protagonist out.